Ferrer is going to do us a favor of giving today. It's really very appropriate, very apropos, I think, to the audience that we have here today. And as a result of that, I believe that there will be a lot of questions and answers. I'm sure that once Mayor Ferrer is done, there will be a very lively dialogue and an extended question and answer session. So let's do that. But then in addition to that, there's a video, 15-minute video that we would like to show you with a specific exercise in Miami-Dade Port. And so what we're going to do is that we're going to go through the presentation normally, and we're going to assign it the time that it should have. But we're going to continue then that extended Q&A period and the video after the session is done at 4 o'clock. So at 4 o'clock, there's a general question and answer session where the speakers that are here, we all can answer anybody's questions, and we will then take 15 minutes to watch that video. So that said, let me tell you a little bit about our next speaker. Alfredo Ferrer is the director of the Port Miami Division of Seaport Law Enforcement, Safety and Security, with oversight of the Port Miami Police Department and all security contingencies at the port. Let me reread that because I think it's highly appropriate that we have here the director of Port Miami Division of Seaport Law Enforcement, Safety and Security, with oversight of the Port of Miami Police Department and all security contingencies at the port. He retired at the rank of major after 25 years with the Miami-Dade Police Department, and Director Ferrer served in a wide range of assignments during his tenure with the Miami-Dade Police Department that included police commander of the Miami-Dade Police Department Seaport Operations Bureau, a variety of specialized patrol functions, investigative duties, training, and the Professional Compliance Bureau as an internal affairs investigator. He holds a Bachelor of Science degrees in Criminal Justice from Florida International University and is a graduate of the FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia. He has served honorably in the United States Coast Guard for 17 years and is currently a Reserve Special Agent assigned to the Coast Guard Investigative Service Southeast Region Miami Field Office. Alfredo, bienvenido.
Thank you, Mr. Duran, and I appreciate that warm welcome. And I'm honored to be here in front of the OAS, in front of our Caribbean partners, our states here that are here with us to learn a little bit more of our best practices. And for the last day and a half, we've kind of seen presentations on regulatory standards, disaster prevention, and environmental approaches. But today I'm going to give you an operational picture of the best practices from a law enforcement perspective. And I know earlier when the Coast Guard former captain of the port was here, some questions came up regarding the security functions of combined with safety. So hopefully I'll be able to answer some of those questions as we go through the presentation. And yesterday, as a matter of fact, Captain Enrique Flores from Mexico actually touched on some of the terrorism issues that we face in our different ports. So as we combine what we have learned in the last couple of days, we realize that we're all in pursuit of a common goal, ensuring the safety and security of our ports and ensuring that our security is, and knowing that our security is paramount within our maritime communities. Next slide, please. Today I'm going to give you an overview of Port Miami, of the business side of the house, as well as a direction of where we're going, some of our innovations, some of our best practices, and most importantly, the reason why we are here. I'm going to talk about the partnerships from a state, a local, and a federal perspective, from the private community partners, from our port users and port tenants, and most importantly, from you all as participating member countries. Next slide, please. As the Director of Seaport Law Enforcement, Safety and Security, I have oversight of all police and security functions at Port Miami. Currently, we are in transition between the Miami-Dade Police Department at the Port of Miami and the Port Miami Police. Recently, we created we were recognized by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and the FBI as a law enforcement agency at Port Miami, and that's kind of unique to the state of Florida, because we are actually the only one, the second one in the state of Florida and the first one in South Florida to be recognized and have our own law enforcement agency within the port, which is important to all of us. And I'll go in more into details about the law enforcement specific functions as we go through the presentation, but I would like to go over now some of the business functions of the port. Next slide, please. Port of Miami has an economic impact of about $27 million and is responsible for approximately 207,000 jobs, directly or indirectly, in South Florida. Our labor at the Port of Miami is actually unionized, from the linemen to the checkers to the porters. And one of the biggest issues that we have, and one of the most important roles that I play at the port, is to ensure that safety and security, that law enforcement is working together with the union. Why is that important? Because that avoids work stoppage. Any issues of concern that come up with the union can cause a work stoppage. So it's important that I'm constantly in communication with those leaders of those unions, that we are constantly communicating and identifying issues and identifying ways that we can improve on our relationships. Next slide, please. Again, Port Miami is recognized as cruise capital of the world with more than 4 million passengers last year. It's expected that in the year to come, we're going to have about 5 million passengers. Every year we have new cruise ships coming on port. This year we had 3, I believe, and we anticipate another 2 additional new ships coming on port next year. Yes, sir. Right now, the biggest ship that we have there is the NCL Getaway class, which is it's one of the biggest vessels that we have there, or the Epic class, I'm sorry, which is the Getaway and the Breeze. In short, on any given day on the cruise ship's side of the house, we have anywhere between 20 to 50,000 passengers transitioning between embark and debark. That doesn't include the employees that we have on the port. That doesn't include our port tenants, our port users. So as you can see, it's a security challenge having all those people there on the port at any given time. Next slide, please. These are some of the cruise companies that we have on the port, some of the industry leaders. And one important thing to note is that part of our security contingent is having their security teams from these different cruise lines working collaboratively with us. That's very important, because that's what, if we work in a partnership, then we resolve a lot of the issues. And we have a security consortium meeting. Next slide, please. We have a security consortium meeting that we hold quarterly. And in that meeting, we invite not only our law enforcement partners, but our port tenants. We invite our operations partners from the port. We invite the security contingents from cargo and the cruise industry at the port to ensure that everyone's on the same page. We identify any issues that we may have throughout the season, any issues that we may have throughout the quarter, and address and mitigate any issues that we may have. Obviously, as you can see from the slide there, we processed more than 900,000 TEUs in 2013. Next slide, please. And again, these are some of the leading cargo lines that are on port right now that work with our port. We have 3 actual cargo yards on the port. And again, they all have their own facility security plan approved by the Coast Guard that is consistent with our security plan. Next slide, please. These are the Super Panamax crane. We're talking about the expansion of the Panama Canal. We currently have 13 cranes. 6 of them are Superpost Panamax. These 4, as you see in the picture here, were received in October of 2013. Those cranes will be able to reach 223 feet or 22 containers wide, 9 containers above deck and 11 below deck. Next slide, please. Again, the deep dredge in preparation for the expansion of the Panama Canal. I happened to be speaking to Mike from DCA yesterday. who happens to be here at the back of the room, and we're talking about how everyone's dredging, including us. So we're actually dredging to 50 to 52 feet right now in order to support some of those vessels in preparation of the expansion of the Panama Canal.
Quick question.
Yes, sir.
Who does the dredging? Port of Miami does? You subcontract that?
It's contracted. It's contracted. Port of Miami contracts. Yes. Part of it is Army Corps of Engineers. They work together with the contractors. Yes. Again, this will give us an increased Asian trade patterns, changing from the West Coast to the East Coast, being the closest port to Panama. Next slide, please. Port Miami Tunnel, again, presenting a number of challenges to the port in the upcoming months. Currently, we are in an island about 2.2 miles long, and it has one way in, one way out. That's good and that's bad. The American Airlines Arena is actually right outside our port. So when there's these Miami Heat games and there's events, it's a huge traffic challenge for law enforcement. With the tunnel opening up, that's going to alleviate some of those issues. But again, now some of my resources have to go to address the security at the tunnel and the checkpoints at the tunnel as well. That's scheduled to open May 19th, as a matter of fact. Next slide, please. On-dock rail, we just started recently on-dock rail. Now cargo can reach 70% of U.S. population in 1 to 4 days, and the Southeast population in about 2 days. Next, please. In about the next 9 slides, we'll speak specifically about our law enforcement and security capabilities. I'll talk a little bit about the specialized units and break them down of how we operate and what functions we have. Next slide, please. This is our Harbor Patrol unit. We actually operate 2 Harbor Patrol boats that were purchased with grant money, federal grant money. We have our police divers, as well as 2 jet skis, high-power rifles on the boats. And, the Coast Guard spoke earlier about closing the channel on certain situations based on the captain of the port's orders. And anytime we have a cruise ship on the channel side of the port, we actually close our channel by using our Harbor Patrol vessels. That means that no boats can actually come in the channel. If it's more than 1 cruise ship, no boats can come on the channel. If it's only 1 cruise ship, we'll keep a 100-yard perimeter around the actual cruise ship. We do this day in and day out when there's cruise ships there. So, as you can see, that's labor intensive, keeping that channel closed. Next slide, please. These are our explosive detection dogs. We have 4 on the port. They train weekly, and they handle not only cargo, but the cruise terminal as well, handle any suspicious bags, and address any contingents that have to be addressed. Next, please. We're kind of unique in the state of Florida. We have, at the Port of Miami, we have the Auto Theft Task Force. The Auto Theft Task Force is a function where any vehicle that's being exported out of the country gets a fee imposed of $7.50 by Customs and Border Protection. Out of that fee, $2.50 go into a trust fund for the police department to investigate the exportation of stolen vehicles. So the Auto Theft Task Force, which operates out of the Port of Miami, will actually go to the yard where they keep all the cars getting ready to be exported. They have a 3-day hold, and we identify any cars that are stolen that are going to go out of the country. And the funding is actually used to follow up on those investigations. Next slide, please. Again, if you look at some of these functions that I just shown, this is basically a multi-agency strike force operation where we did a checkpoint coming into the port. And this is where all the local and federal partners work together to address some of these functions. Next slide, please. Next slide. These are some of the other resources that we have. On your top left, you have the Command and Control Center. That's basically where we monitor all our alarms and cameras for the port. The right, that's what we have, the unified command. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And then right below there, you have what they call license plate readers. We have license plate readers that were bought with federal funding, again, that are permanently mounted at the entrance to the port and the exits, and identify all the tags of all the cars coming in and out of the port. At the command and control center on your top left there is a computer that actually reads out and gives up any readings that may come up on any type of issue with a tag, whether the car is stolen or a suspicious tag, and then our officers will actually go out and identify it. Very soon, top left, two of those positions will actually be the public safety dispatch center, basically like a 911 center for the police dispatch for the Port Miami Police. Next slide, please. We have a radar surveillance system, which again, on that wall that you saw up on the command and control center, actually sits up there 24 hours a day. And basically that works on the vessel automatic identification system, where we identify all the vessels that are within the port. That same system is actually accessible to our harbor patrol vessels on their computer laptops that are on the boats, so that they can identify any vessels throughout the island. And basically what you see there is basically the island of the port. Next slide, please. This again is that one picture that I told you about, the unified command. That's inside our command and control center. And during any type of incident, during any type of natural event, such as a hurricane, I know that the hurricane issue came up earlier. That's basically where all the heads of all the resources go to. Our operations for the port, all our law enforcement partners, our security partners. Everyone responds there. That table gets set up with basically a nameplate for their agency, and everybody sits there. There's common phones that are used, and that's where we have our briefings. That's where we basically run the operation from there. About a year ago, President Barack Obama visited Port Miami, and that was actually our hub with the Secret Service, where we had our unified command and had all the resources for the security of the president. The next few slides, next slide, please. The next few slides is going to talk to something that's going to interest you all. Trinidad and Tobago is actually one of our first members to participate. We recently signed an MOU. Last year, we signed an MOU with the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs of the State Department. And what this MOU does is basically brings ports like you all to Port of Miami to see some of our best practices, to identify areas maybe that you can implement in your respective ports and take it back with you. I know I've spoken to a lot of the different partners here about training and moving forward. I know Dominica, we were talking about doing something like this, and this is where we actually bring everything to fruition. Next slide, please. Again, this was the welcome by our port director, and coincidentally, the lieutenant governor from the state of Florida happened to be at the port on that day that we had the delegation there, and while they were doing the welcome remarks, they did it together. Next slide, please. It all starts off with classroom presentations. As you see, our staff, as well as the United States Coast Guard, Customs and Border Protection, and all the local partners actually participate. We invite them to do some classroom sessions, and that's basically where we start the presentations. Once we do the classroom session, then and they see how the port actually works, similar to this type of forum, then we actually go out on the field and embed the group into our different operations so that they can see how the operations actually work. Next slide, please. This is basically the portion with the terminal operations, where they're looking not only as the baggages are dropped off, but again, in the middle there, you'd see the magnetometers, where we do the screening for the passengers coming into the port. We do the water side, where our ships are actually docked. And Again, these aren't pictures that are posed. They don't pose for these pictures. These pictures are actually live and in color. This is happening as you see it. And we had a photographer to go along with us so that we can capture these moments so that we can obviously pass it on to the other countries that want to participate. Next slide, please. Again, these are some of the other areas where they were embedded. The top left is actually the command and control center. Top right is actually K9 doing a demonstration with their explosives on one of the terminals. Bottom right is the other part of the command and control center where they actually get to see the cameras, the alarms, and the IT part of the house. And then bottom left is our harbor patrol units. Next slide, please. We actually hold a multi-agency strike force operation, again, similar to what I spoke to earlier at the checkpoints. And this is basically where we actually bring CBP out with us, and we do a full operation with CBP, Coast Guard, and other state and local partners. And we have them participate and see how we do these operations. Next slide, please. Again, the Auto Theft Task Force, we actually hold an Auto Theft Task Force operation on one of the days so that they can see how we identify the vehicles, what we look for, and some of the operations on how they work. Again, as you see on the top right there, Customs and Border Protection is a big partner at Port Miami. Next slide, please. Basically, the success of the port and of Port Miami has been as a result of a team, is being able to have local, state, and federal partners working together, whether it's from law enforcement, the U.S. Coast Guard, Customs and Border Protection, private security, private partners, port users, cargo, and security partners. The most important part of being successful on the port is not only to think of your law enforcement partners, and that's from a security and law enforcement perspective, but to think of your daily operations, whether it's your operations persons that run your day in, day out operations of docking your ships, your IT person that runs all your electronic and technical equipment, your engineering, your maintenance. Those are all people that run the port day in and day out and need to be part of the mission, part of the security and mission, part of the safety and security, because it all works together in unison. Very important as you see these partners, and we probably have about another 10 partners that are not there on this slide. Don't wait till the event day, and I know this was mentioned before, and I believe the captain of the port that was here earlier actually mentioned that. Don't wait till game day to build those partnerships. Don't wait till you have an event or a situation where you have nobody to call other than an agency. Have personal relationships. Conduct quarterly meetings, like I said, quarterly, monthly meetings with your security personnel, with your partners from your different countries and from your different law enforcement entities, and again, from your private partners. Hold regular meetings, even if it's a 15-minute, 20-minute meeting, but put a face to a name, not just a business card. And again, that's one of the best things about these type of events is this networking, because now we all put faces to names, and we can all pick up the phone and say, hey, what do you think of this? Hey, what do you think of that? And work off each other to better our safety and security posture. But again, don't wait till game day. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I just want to add something else. I come more from the Coast Guard side than the law enforcement side, but you used the phrase incident command system, and one of the things that I was made aware of is that there was an intentional move towards having a harmonized crisis response system, the ICS.
Yes, ma'am.
And that means that if it's a multimodal event, say in the port, you all speak the same language.
That is
so
correct.
that everybody understands, incident command system, the JIG,
JIG.
Joint Information Command Center, so that when you get to the event, everybody understands what their roles are and also speak that same language and know what the structure is of the incident command system. And that, I think, was an important movement on the part of our United States system, was to unify the language, to harmonize the language and the structures for crisis?
As a matter of fact, currently the port security grant is out from DHS, and part of that port security grant is to ensure that everyone within your organization is actually ICS certified at the different levels. And the ICS started, we started the training with ICS. For example, I did it with the Miami-Dade Police Department years ago. We started with a 100 level and worked the different levels based on your different ranks and built on that. And I know the fire departments do that as well. From the state perspective, you know, there's a lot of regional interconnectivity. From the, I know in the state of Florida there is, and I'm sure that throughout the different states there are as well. And the Coast Guard is actually moving in that same direction. So yes, that is very good, and that's the same language. Again, it goes down to, you know, we all have different codes, especially from a law enforcement or security perspective. Everybody talks in codes on the radio and all that. With the ICS system coming into play, everybody talks just regular language, and we're able to communicate and understand each other during an incident. Thank you for that point. Good. Are there any questions?
Yes.
Let's see, Trinidad, Chris, and then Captain over there.
Good,
Yes,
yes, sir. The security perimeter, is it for all cruise liners, no matter what size or where they come from, or where the next port of call? And if this is so, is this a statutory requirement, or it is a policy of the Port of Miami?
No, it's for any cruise ship, that regardless of where it comes from, and it is actually mandated by the captain of the port. Again, we're on an island. If you look at our port, we're on an island. We have that channel there, so it actually prevents or mitigates from small vessel attacks, which is obviously has been always a big challenge.
Chris, St. Lucia.
Good day. I'm Alexander from St. Lucia. I saw one of your pics. They were where you had some jet ski patrols near
Yes.
a vessel, and that's one area in terms of financial constraints in St. Lucia. I mean, the government now is reviewing in terms of having patrols conducted within the harbor and somewhere close to the coastline in terms of the jet skis. Do you have protocols or SOPs in place as far as utilizing those jet skis, or are there specially developed jet skis that the Coast Guard purchased on behalf of the port?
No, the actual those actually belong to the port of Miami, and they were bought with grant money. They were approved by the captain of the port during one of the grants, and we use them to patrol our channel with the actual jet skis. But they're regular jet skis purchased from a company through a grant, and they're owned by Port of Miami and marked off with the police markings. And then my officers actually go to training and get certified to operate these jet skis at high speeds and to address any or mitigate any situation they may have.
Follow up in terms of the training for those jet skis, because I think that's some area which you're open to implement before your end. Do you have a training manual, or can you exchange ideas in terms of training for the specifics of utilizing those jet skis for law enforcement patrols?
There's actually a training course that the officers have to go to, just like to operate the vessels, the harbor patrol boats. They have to be certified in that function, and the same thing goes for. There's actually a course that's put together through the Miami-Dade Police Department, and again, that's something that maybe we can sidebar and talk about regarding some future. As a matter of fact, Mr. Duran and I were talking about some future possibilities, and that may be something that we can work out so that we can get you that training if you need that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Captain. And then Hope. A ver si puedes agarrar el micrófono que sigue. Y apagar ese.
Bueno,
Ahora sí.
sí. Capitán Casarrubias, capitán de puerto de Veracruz, México. Hace muchos años tuve la oportunidad de ser capitán a bordo de buques de contenedores, allá por los 80, 90, y cada 35 días llegábamos al puerto de Miami, procedentes de puertos europeos. A mí me da mucho gusto escuchar que Miami está manejando casi 1.000.000 de contenedores, 4 millones de pasajeros, con 20 a 30 mil pasajeros diarios, lo que sin lugar, como usted bien lo dijo, ha sido todo un reto a la seguridad. Tuvimos la oportunidad hace un par de años, varios capitanes de puerto, entre ellos el compañero capitán Gallardo que me acompaña, de estar en un intercambio con la Coast Guard para ver el cumplimiento del código PVP, el Código de Protección a Buques e Instalaciones Portuarias. Estuvimos en el puerto de Miami y nos fuimos muy satisfechos de ver en la forma como están cumpliendo con este código varias terminales de cruceros. Yo en lo particular es felicitarlo a usted porque Miami ha sido ejemplo mundial al combinar turismo y carga, que es algo muy difícil que se dé en un puerto, precisamente por las exigencias del turismo hacia la carga comercial. Ustedes están manejando contenedores y autos. Y obviamente felicidades a la dirección y a las propias autoridades del puerto de Miami. Mi pregunta es, ¿el pilotaje y el centro de control de tráfico marítimo de quién dependen? ¿Directamente de la misión del puerto o de la autoridad marítima?
El pilotaje es, primero que todo, muchas gracias por esas palabras. Y el pilotaje es los pilots de Miami, que es una compañía privada, una organización privada, y ellos tienen el pilotaje de los barcos que entran y salen.
¿Y el centro de control de tráfico marítimo lo manejan ellos?
El centro de control de tráfico
BTS.
marítimo, bueno, hay diferentes partes. Una parte la tiene el guardacosta de los Estados Unidos, la otra parte la tiene la división de operaciones de nosotros, del puerto, de los barcos que entran y salen al puerto de Miami, y la otra parte obviamente el pilotaje.
Gracias.
De nada.
Thank you. Hope Tandelisa from Jamaica. 2 quick questions. Firstly, do you allow the cruise ships to undertake incineration in port? And secondly, what are the major issues that you confront in seeking to obtain an environmental permit to undertake dredging?
The first part you said, as far as taking provisions, is for the cruise ships.
Incineration in port, do you allow that? For the cruise ships to incinerate in port?
The incident rate, burning. No, we do not do that on port. We do not do that on port. I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question, but we do not do that on port. And what was the second part? I'm sorry.
In seeking to undertake your dredging project, what sort of major issues do you confront in seeking to obtain an environmental permit?
I know that's been I haven't really been involved in that side of the house, but I know there's been some challenges, obviously, with the environmentalists and the coral. And one of the things they're doing is they're relocating some of the coral. So those are the challenges that I know that they're facing, is where they're doing the relocation of some of the coral and some of the through the environmental issues.
Yeah, hi. We heard mentioned earlier that cybersecurity is an issue for the marine industry at large moving forward. I was wondering if you could detail what you, as the port security director for Miami, foresee for the port as a potential cybersecurity issue, and what risk mitigation factors are you taking?
We're currently, like I said, we're currently in the application stages of the DHS Port Security Grant. And that's actually one of the projects that we're submitting. I don't know the technicalities of it because obviously that's handled through our IT department. We have an IT chief that actually handles that, works in collaboration with me. But obviously the challenge that we would face with something like that would be someone taking control of obviously our cameras and alarm systems, which would obviously put us open us up to some security risks, especially the alarm system and all the access control to the port. So that's one of the issues that we're trying to mitigate right now.
Thank you.
Michael Jenkins from Belize. Do y'all have any guidelines in regards to regulations and to the rental of jet skis in and around the port of Miami? The use and the rental of jet skis.
Actually, Miami, because of the weather and a lot of the Caribbean countries here, obviously there's a lot of use for jet skis, a lot of owned jet skis. Coincidentally, right across the bay from us is actually a company that rents out the jet skis. And we actually, as long as they don't violate that security zone, then they're able to do whatever they need to do. We're basically to protect that island and that security zone.
Sí, Hugo Sergio Gómez de la Universidad de Tampico. Sin duda, las medidas del código PVP que usted menciona y en lo general las que proporciona el Estado han tenido un costo pues enorme en algunos casos. ¿Cómo se repercute este costo en los usuarios, en los buques, en la revisión de los contenedores? ¿Hay alguna tarifa adicional o cómo se está manejando? Porque es, bueno, pues es una inversión enorme que en algunos lugares se está haciendo.
Esa parte no se la sé decir porque esa es la parte de financiera del puerto. Yo sé que tienen un costo que se le agrega al proceso de los buques, pero no les sé decir exactamente cuál es.
Muy bien.
Soy Manuel Gutiérrez, soy el director de Protección Marítima y Portuaria de México. Yo creo que la pregunta acerca que hacía el capitán Casarrubia acerca del pilotaje es ¿quién regula aquí o quién regula en Miami o quién le da los lineamientos a los pilotos o quién certifica a los pilotos de puerto para trabajar? ¿Es la autoridad marítima o ellos mismos se califican entre ellos o cómo lo hace Miami?
Creo que ellos tienen una escuela donde se califican entre ellos mismos. Ellos son una organización bastante grande, pero no les sé decir específicamente porque no trabajan para el puerto directamente.
Ok. Ahora en el caso del compañero acerca de la incineración, el Marpol Anexo 5, la recolección de la basura, ahora está vinculada con el código PVP. El Anexo 5, la recolección de basura en una instalación portuaria, se debe de hacer de acuerdo al Marpol, el Anexo 5. Y la disposición final de esa basura es la incineración. Yo sí creo que Miami tiene ese servicio. Estoy seguro que lo tiene. Exactamente. ¿Quién se encarga de supervisar en Miami, en el puerto de Miami, que se haga la recolección de basura de acuerdo al Marpol y de acuerdo al código PVP?
Eso parte de el guardacosta. Inclusive nosotros tenemos una oficina del guardacosta en el mismo puerto. La parte regulatoria del guardacosta y la parte de operaciones del puerto se encarga de eso.
Okay. Gracias.
I'm sorry. In fact, Alfredo, if there's no more questions or comments, we actually have enough time to run the video, which we put up on there on screen. Is that everybody okay with that, running the video now? Oh, wait, running it concurrently is very crazy. So let's just, can we rewind that?
Cámbiame la hora en que yo filme,
This is a multi-agency exercise that we did on the port. We try to do at least one every 6 months. And this is one that we did. We incorporated an active shooter, an explosive device. It was basically a jealous boyfriend that came on port. What you see there is obviously as we check in our officers, the safety of the actual operation. Checking in the officers, signing everyone in, identifying who's going to be wearing safety vest for the purpose of being a supervising the event. This is actually the briefing after everyone's checked in. And in this particular event, we incorporated a number of resources from the Miami-Dade Police Department. She's our hostage for the day. Rosie, we're gonna walk through the whole scenario very fast, but I'm gonna tell you exactly what you gotta do, and I already. Randy, where'd you lose? I gotta get the form.
You know, the other day I had a rash, and I had to use some kind of talcum powder to really get, you know, that area there.
Yeah. I've had that problem.
And it was really irritating.
It's blonde. When they come up and say negative, it's blonde.
Okay, so that's why I wanted to ask.
Who's that first car? Block the whole thing. Block. This is actually the jealous boyfriend or the active shooter, and this is how it all starts. An officer gets information that there's a suspicious vehicle. As he approaches the vehicle, this is what happens. Again, he takes a young lady hostage. Before he even got there, he actually dropped a backpack, which he later gets identified with an IED. If you go to Port Miami, when you're coming in on the cruise ship terminal, the first people you run into is Customs and Border Protection. So this is basically going through a terminal if we had an active terminal. These are police explorers. They actually provided some of the role playing.
Two stay down. Two stay down. Go.
Go ahead, I got you covered over here. I got you covered.
Again, this is where the partnerships come in, making sure that we train together so that we respond together.
Okay, once you come into in the base of the escalator, right here.
They're here. Follow the sidewalk.
Now, the Port of Miami has what we call an incident containment team. Basically, every officer on the port is trained in incident containment, and they respond to active shooters. That's where you see them with the helmet, and they're ready to respond to address any active shooter within a terminal. They have the long rifles. They have the helmets. These are just your regular road officers that are working within the port. Now again, we have the yellow vests are evaluators that are sitting there evaluating the whole incident. The officers are gonna make mistakes, but this is where you want them to make the mistakes.
CBP is advising they're inside the bridge.
What, see this? Yeah, come on.
At this point, the gentleman with the yellow vest is actually one of the instructors. The Miami-Dade Police Department is actually relieving CBP so that CBP can continue doing other perimeter checks. And at that time, Miami-Dade Police will hold the scene until the SWAT team arrives.
To my office, the second floor, and left clear on my own. Okay. Clear, second floor, okay? All right.
Now this is one of the mistakes I'll point it out. Obviously they missed one person that was hiding under the counter. And now you'll see the instructor actually call them back.
We started and then we
Sergeant, who's in charge here? Who's in charge here? Sergeant, you in charge here?
Yes.
Are we sure this area is clear? Are we sure? Somebody make a decision and say, are we sure this area is clear?
I need two of your officers, and one of my officers to clear the spot. One of
I
my
mean,
officers.
just so
the
you
rest
know,
go
there's
upstairs.
been people coming through here the whole time in and out.
Make sure you clear everybody.
Is this clear or is it not clear? I mean,
It's not clear yet, I don't think 100%.
okay, good.
Get up. Come out from under there. Now, put your hands up. Put them where I can see them. Move it. Hey, come here. Come toward me. Come toward me. Go that way.
Again, this is not uncommon at the Port of Miami to see a Miami-Dade police officer or a Port Miami police officer with a Customs and Border Protection officer. As a matter of fact, when we do the checkpoints or we heighten our alert, we work hand in hand to be together in the different checkpoints.
Where's the dead one?
There's actually the SWAT team coming in to relieve the officers that are inside.
We'll have to determine where the stairwell is from the second floor.
team out, stand by here, you guys could close the coverage.
Once we get inside there.
Once we find a stairwell, we're gonna go over the stairwell. Hey, let me get down,
300. Our responsibility is going to be to get in there and hold points on the actual. The subject's been seen on the first floor. He's in one of the rooms that's inside the, just past the lobby. We're going to get up there and pass whatever stairwell so they can get up on the stairwell and go clear the second floor. So just let's move up to any points that we see uniform at. Relieve uniform, get them out of the building, and then hold points on the downstairs doors. We're holding points on downstairs doors.
Those ballistic shields that the SWAT team is carrying were actually issued to all the units within the department now in order to address any active shooter within their respective area.
A lot of numbers. Where's Phil? Phil.
This is the backpack that the subject or the role player dropped as he was running in firing at the officers. And again, that's where we bring all the resources and put them to work. This is actually the bomb squad now dealing with another issue outside of the hostage that we have inside.
Don't want anything to happen to Rosie, right, Alejandro?
Now this is the hostage negotiator, and basically the SWAT team has already taken over the scene where the hostage is.
I'm sure she's proud of you too. Okay, I don't want anything to happen to you, Alejandro, and I don't want anything to happen to Rosie. None of us have to be here, Alejandro. We can end this. What will it take for you to come outside, Alejandro? No, Alejandro. I don't want it to end in a bad way. I want you to be okay.
You're very upset right now. And you sound scared. I would be too. I would be really scared too if I was
Now we change negotiators so that everybody has an opportunity to go through.
Rosie. Rosie?
So now this would have gone on and on and on and on. So it's real.
This is our police psychologist basically briefing he runs the negotiators, and he's briefing the negotiators, giving them feedback.
Then, just when we have it kind of like going for the hook, you come in.
There was another component there that didn't get captured on video, which was we had an officer, one of the officers got shot in the leg, so we had an officer down at the same time also.
Scenario's over. Scenario's over. All units, scenario's over.
Right there and then, as soon as the scenario's over, everybody converges to one area, and then we have an actual evaluation. We had feedback.
Was Rosie the girlfriend?
Weeks, 6 weeks of work to try to get all these moving parts together. And I tried to choose the people that would help me out. Lieutenant Lopez from the port put the first portion of it together. He's the one that divides the incident with the individual coming in with an ID. Then from there, we added in a little bit of a mix with Melvin. He was the role player that was actually the downed officer in the back. Alex Andrade from narcotics was the subject and the hostage taker, and Stephanie is one of our interns over at Site Services with Dr. Allen. Based on all the stuff that we were trying to put together, we made a lot of things that culminated for all of us to get together and do this thing bit by bit. We're not going to completely hatchet this by
again, that pretty much concludes the actual exercise. This was an exercise that started about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, ended about 11 o'clock at night. And it puts all the resources in play. My biggest fear, I know we talk about terrorism and we talk about some of the challenges that we have within our ports. Having such a high turnover in cruise ships on the terminals of our port, my biggest fear, to be honest with you, is a jealous boyfriend, a jealous husband, a jealous wife, a jealous girlfriend that shows up on the port and causes a domestic issue, something like that, which is very common nowadays. So I try to make my scenarios as realistic as possible. We try to practice for something like this, but we include the terrorist aspect of it, because at that point, once he drops that AED, you don't know really what you have. And there are other scenarios that we do that actually involve terrorism acts. Our harbor patrol units participate. So there's a lot of different numbers of scenarios that we do. Just before I flew into DC here, we had actually done an active shooter with Royal Caribbean has their headquarters within our port, and we actually trained their security staff that handles their building and their employees on dealing with an active shooter situation. So again, we have to look at all the facets of security and safety at the port, not only from a terrorism perspective, but from other areas that may concern us as well.
Thank you very much, Major Ferrer. Thank you very much. And congratulations, needless to say. I would ask the audience to hold on to any further questions that we have for Major Ferrer until we finish the day, so that we can approach them then and then continue with our next speakers and try to hold that schedule. Te debo un diploma. Por aquí lo tengo.
I will say, George, just real quick, I'm actually going to be around the rest of the seminar and actually tomorrow as well. So if you have any questions, feel free. We can do sidebar. And I know there's already been some questions that have come up while I've been here. So feel free to grab me out there and we can talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you again. And now, if I could invite our next speakers to come up here, please. We now have two participants, two speakers, who are going to speak to us from FEMSA, from hazardous materials and the maritime industry. So I'm sure that this will be talking about MARPOL and the annex corresponding to that. Mr. Vince Babish and Mr. Stephen Webb, both from the United States Department of Transportation, specifically the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, also known as FEMSA, specifically the Division of Hazardous Materials. Welcome, guys. Please take a seat.
Welcome again. Thank you.
And what I'm going to ask our speakers is to just go ahead and give a brief introduction about yourself, and then we can jump right into the presentation. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for allowing us to come and speak to you today. My name's Steve Webb, and this is Vince Babish. We both work for the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, which is within the United States Department of Transportation. We have many specific functions and missions, but primarily it's a safety agency responsible for the safe transportation of hazardous materials or dangerous goods, as you might know them. A little bit about myself. I was previously in the Coast Guard. I taught people how to inspect inbound shipments, outbound shipments as well, containerized cargo, container full of oxygen cylinders, lithium batteries, methyl ethyl kill you, whatever you might have. Did that, and now I've been here for about 3.5 years. I specifically work on the maritime side, so I'm a member of the U.S. delegation to the International Maritime Organization, which is responsible for our specific subcommittee, is responsible for updating the IMDG code, which you may be familiar with, which helps regulate the transportation of dangerous goods by vessel. Vince?
Good afternoon, and I'm Vince Babish. Also, I work along with Steve Webb. I have a slightly different background, where Steve's background is really focused on the maritime and vessel movement. I have more of a highway background. I was a member of the Pennsylvania State Police. I retired from the Pennsylvania State Police, um, and, uh, and during that time, for a good portion of my time in the state police, I managed our commercial vehicle safety and enforcement program. As you know, the very large quantity of the hazardous materials are transported by vehicle, by commercial vehicle, and that was a large part of our mission, was to ensure the safety and to enforce the regulations and the laws concerning highway transportation of those materials. Just get started. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Next slide, please. Our general agenda here is to give you a quick overview of PHMSA and its hazardous materials objectives and mission, some information on security plans, training requirements, the emergency response guidebook. We did bring some guidebooks with us, the Spanish version of our guidebook. Hopefully we have enough to get to everybody. Mr. Webb will be giving you a little bit more about that directly. Some incident reporting, and then getting into some items on our international system regarding regulation of hazardous materials, and some information specifically about vessel transport. Next slide, please. So our mission at PHMSA is pretty simple. We want to safeguard people in the environment from the risks inherent in the transportation of hazardous material. We would like to mitigate all risk. However, we know that that's impossible. The only way to mitigate the risk in transportation of hazardous materials completely would be to stop that from occurring. We'll see in a couple of seconds how important that transportation is. So while our focus would be on mitigating all risk, we understand that there is a limit to what we can do, and maintain safety and security while still providing an environment where those materials can be transported. And so we focus really a lot on reducing high consequence incidents, and PHMSA, we're more responsible for the implementation of the regulations and enforcing our regulations. Our regulations encompass all of the modes of transportation: air, vessel, highway, and rail. So while we do promulgate the regulations, there are other agencies that also have their own regulations and also enforce ours. Next slide, please. This is a quick overview of our Office of Hazardous Materials Safety. PHMSA itself has an administrator, and then we have, for hazardous materials safety, an associate administrator. Now, this is pretty important because under our hazardous materials regulations and under the various international regulations, a country has to have a competent authority, somebody who is responsible for regulating the hazardous materials, issuing permits and approvals. Our associate administrator of PHMSA is the competent authority for hazardous materials transportation within the United States. And then our agency, our office, has a full contingent of service, standards and rulemaking, PHH 10, that's where we work. We actually write the regulations, and to assist us in doing that, we have an engineering and research division, which are scientists and engineers. approvals and permits for those situations where regulations can't cover a specific item, or the competent authority is authorized under regulations to approve. They do that. Field operations actually does enforcement themselves, a lot of packaging types of enforcement and shipper requirements. And then we have an outreach, training, and grants division, and program development. Next slide, please. So what is hazmat? We probably all know what it is, but next slide. The things that we recognize normally, some of the bigger things, we see them every day. We see them on the rails. We see them going on to, coming off of the ships, on the highways. Often, you know, they're recognized by the placard that's displayed on it that has, we have essentially 9 hazard classes of materials, and the regulations are written or intended to do pretty much 2 things. Number 1 is to contain the material in transportation, and then the second one is to communicate that. So the first responders know, or workers know, that they are dealing with hazardous materials in a situation where they come in contact with them. Next slide, please. So yeah, we see all of those larger things and we recognize them, but we also have to recognize the scope of other items that are considered hazardous materials that we often use every single day in our own lives. And you know, all of these materials, from the larger to these household items, have to be transported. A lot of times we don't think about some of the things that we have up on the slide as being hazardous materials, but indeed they are, and in some way they are regulated too. Next slide. So by definition, exactly what is a hazardous material? And under our hazmat law, it says the Secretary, and in that particular situation is the Secretary of Transportation, shall designate hazardous materials or designate materials as hazardous, that transportation in commerce in a particular amount or form may pose an unreasonable risk to health and safety or property. Real important there, unreasonable risk. As I talked earlier, yeah, we can't eliminate all risk. We understand the importance of having to transport hazardous materials. They have to get moved around. They have to get moved around economically. So we look at removing that unreasonable, or controlling that unreasonable risk. And internationally, while we in the United States call them hazardous materials, internationally they're most commonly known as dangerous goods. Next slide. And just to follow up on some of my previous comments of the importance and the need for hazardous materials shipment, up to 1 million shipments each day, 1.6 billion tons shipped by all modes, specifically by vessel, 34 million containers entering the United States alone, and about 12% of all freight that is shipped annually is hazardous material in one way or the other. Next slide.
And so these are a few examples of things, as Vince said, we're trying to prevent. So what our agency's mission and goal is. I think we have a representative from each of the modes here. That's I believe that's the UPS plane on the top left. You've got a rail car derailment in the bottom left, a highway cargo tank incident in the top right, and then the vessel unfortunate incident at the bottom. I suspect that has nothing to do with hazmat. It's more or less a loading issue at the bottom, but nonetheless, those are the things we're seeking to mitigate. And as Vince said, it's impossible to think that we could keep all incidents from occurring, but what we do is to regulate the packaging, the amount that can be in a package, the segregation distances from other hazardous materials. We try and keep these things as safe as possible during transport. So we'll talk about a few things in the next few slides that may be a little unique to the domestic regulation of hazardous materials to 49 CFR. And then towards the end, we'll talk a little bit about the international regulations, some changes you'll see to the IMDG code. Does anybody utilize IMDG code in their ports? Vessel stowage, segregation, loading, that type of stuff probably. Dangerous cargo manifest preparation, all that stuff comes relatively out of there. I mean, you can backtrack it to SOLAS or to in some regards MARPOL, but the code will be your guide for all that. So next slide, please. And in PHMSA's toolbox to facilitate safety, regulations are just one way that we try and keep the community as a whole and transportation workers safe. So obviously we put these regulations in place with the intent that if you properly package this, you properly label it, you declare it correctly, that should provide as much aversion to risk as we can provide. However, we offer these additional job aids and things to the industry and to the regulated community. We have education and compliance assistance. We have some of our enforcement, for lack of a better term, agents can go out and help you look at what you're doing and say, well, maybe you need to look at this. You might want to do something a little differently. We do oversight and inspection. People that manufacture cylinders, people that perform testing on packages that are going to carry hazardous materials. We want to make sure that that those are appropriately being carried out. And then through global leadership, the 49, our domestic regulations have been around since, 40s, well, 05 originally for explosives, but a lot of the individual packaging requirements have been around since the 40s and 50s and were more developed than maybe some other areas in the world. So a lot of the things that we had in regulation were carried over into the UN model regulations, and then and then trickled down into the IMDG code, the ICAO, the different modal regulations. So next slide, please. So one thing that we have domestically, and it ties in, I know the focus of your seminar this week is security and safety. And we're primarily a safety agency. But when you look at hazardous materials in your ERG that we handed out, and I apologize that we only brought Spanish versions, we have English versions as well. I guess I'm mistakenly assumed that Spanish versions would apply to everyone, but we'll get you, there's an address in the back, an email address that you can get a hold of some English versions if you'd like. But in the wrong hands, hazmat can pose a significant security risk. Quite obviously, there are 3,400 and some odd things listed specifically by name in the dangerous goods list in the IMDG code. Of those 3,500 things, you've got things like radioactive materials, you've got corrosives, you've got flammable solids, you've got dangerous when wet materials. These things that in bulk quantities can do a significant amount of damage in the wrong hands. So we've had some security provisions in the regulations prior to September 11th, but we instituted a new security plan requirement as a result of September 11th to hope to keep people that transport and offer large quantities of certain materials to at least make them assess what they're doing, what their transportation vulnerabilities are. And next slide, we'll talk about that a little bit. So the requirement is you must develop and implement, as the slide says, a security plan if you offer for transportation or you transport any of the 16 types of quantities of dangerous goods that are listed in section 172.800. And I didn't list all 16 types, but they're high explosives, your 1.1s, 1.2s, so missiles and some of your ammonium nitrate mixtures, things like that. Anything that's toxic or poisonous by inhalation, dangerous when wet materials, some of your higher consequence radioactive materials, and then also pretty much all organic peroxide materials. And there's some other various ones, and some of these have quantity limitations, but let's go to the next slide. We'll talk about what that security plan has to include. So it's basically a two-part plan. The first part of the plan is that you need to perform an assessment of your transportation security risks. You need to look at everything from who has access to our facilities, what's our routing like for transportation purposes. We offer to the truck, where does he go? Although they're sort of separate plans, one for the offerer and one for the carrier. But all of these things should be looked at in your initial assessment. And then once you've done that assessment, the second part of the plan is you have to take appropriate measures to address your assessed risks. So when we go in, PHMSA has enforcement authority to go in and check on these security plans. And when we go and we say, well, you're offering one of these 16 things, where's your plan? We'll take a look at their plan. And, okay, you did your assessment. Let's say there's a glaring hole. You know, anyone has access to our facility. Well, what did you do to address that plan? Nothing. Well, there's your problem. So we'll, you know, probably find them, but we'll work with them to address that security risk and shore up whatever that might be. Next slide, please. So that's security plans. Training requirements, this is a big thing, and this is not unique to 49, to domestic regulations. There are training requirements in the IMDG code. There are training requirements in ICAO for air transport. However, this is our #1 single largest enforcement violation. I don't know the number. I'd hate to lie to you, but it's probably half, I would guess, of our enforcement options. It might be even higher than that. Enforcement actions are you know, violations for training. It's the cornerstone of hazardous materials transportation. If we expect you to do things correctly, to put it in the right box, to put the right label on it, to declare it correctly, well, you have to know how to do that. You can't just pick up our 49 CFR is this big. You've seen the IMDG code; they're huge volumes. You can't just pick them up and, you know, listen, I think I did this right. So training requires 4 specific elements and a 5th for some, but general awareness training, you need to be mostly it's like it says, it's general awareness. It's, you know, what the 9 hazard classes are, you know, a little bit about what they consist of, that type of thing. Function specific is exactly what it says. You need to be trained in the area that you're going to perform. If all you do all day is put bottles inside of a box, you need to have been trained how to do that properly. If your job is to load a freight container and segregate, you need to have had that training. Safety training goes a little bit more into general, it's kind of tied to general awareness. It's, you know, what personal protective equipment you need to have, what to do in case of a spill, that type of thing. And then security awareness, you need to know, you need to be aware that hazardous materials can be used as weapons and are dangerous in transport. And then also, if you have a role in the security plan, then you need to be aware of that security plan. So next slide, please. And this is our ERG slide, and we handed out a copy of the Emergency Response Guidebook. If you see, this is the 2012 version. It is the Spanish version. I do apologize for that again. We can get English versions for you. But we printed in English and Spanish, I believe in French as well. I just haven't seen one. But what its primary purpose is it's published every 4 years, so it's recently updated. The next one will be in 2016. Its primary purpose is to provide emergency responders with an initial tool to use if there's a spill or a release of a hazardous material. Like I said, there are 3,500 commodities. Even the best trained firefighter doesn't know how to respond to 3,500 different commodities. Doesn't know the properties, doesn't know what first aid do I need, what personal protective equipment do I need, these types of things. That's what this book is going to do. So let's take a look at it for a minute. I'm going to go off the slide. We didn't plan on this, but we just got these today, so I didn't know we would have them. If you look at the yellow pages, it's sort of broken up into 4 different sections. Well, count the white pages. The white pages at the front give you some just introductory text and good information about different labels and markings and things like that. But the yellow pages are a complete listing by UNID number. So in theory, if there's a spill or a leak or some sort, you have a shipping paper, you have a transport document, you know what it is, hopefully. You see a container in the port that is leaking yellow goo, you get the transport document, you say, okay, I have UN 1493. So let's look up 1493. Should be in numerical order here under ID number 1493. And if you get there, you should realize you have silver nitrate, which would match up to your transport document. And there's a number next to 1493 that says 140. That's going to give you the guide number. Now the guide numbers are the orange pages. So you want to go to the orange page number 140. 140. And if you look at the top of page 140, it's going to have a general term. It tells you this is for oxidizers. So this page is assigned to a bunch of different oxidizer entries. But for our silver nitrate, it's going to give us what to do if there's a fire or explosion. Kind of tells you that a fire or explosion is a potential hazard. It talks about some of the health risks. You know, inhalation, ingestion, or contact with vapors may cause severe injury. But for responders, I think the next couple sections are the most important. You have a public safety section, talks about an immediate isolation zone. Stay upwind, keep out of low areas, ventilate closed spaces, these types of things that are important to responders. What type of protective clothing you should be wearing in dealing with this spill. And then the last section there on the left page is the evacuation distance. If you have a large spill, evacuate for 100 meters. It's in a circle. And then if there's a fire or a tank or a rail car involved, 800 meters. So it's a real handy guide for these first responders. And there's more information on the right page about what to do if there's a small spill or a leak. You know, use a clean shovel and place materials on it to scoop it up, that type of thing. And then a first aid section, so someone's been exposed to this. There are lots of things in here where maybe your first response to someone that is unconscious and passed out on the ground would be to give them CPR or something like that. Well, there are a handful of things in here that if you did that, you're going to do a lot more damage to yourself and possibly them as well. So this guide we've given out millions of these things over a couple of decades. Our goal is to have one in every emergency responder's vehicle. And I think we do a pretty good job of that domestically. It's available online as well. There's PDF versions online, and we also have an app for BlackBerry, Android and Apple products. But just to show you, if you didn't know the UNID number, you could look in the blue pages, and those are proper shipping names. So you could look up lithium batteries or gasoline or crude oil or whatever you might have. And then the last section is the green section. And I don't get too into this, but when you looked up your commodity by UN number, if it was highlighted in green, you have to go to this green section. It's for poisonous, toxic materials, saying, hey, there's some larger isolation areas. We want you to keep people out of larger areas. So that's pretty much the ERG guide, but it's handy. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, and for those of you who may not have gotten the book or need or want a English version, the files are also right online on our website too. Plus, one additional thing that I really want to, it's really important, is we also now have an app for a smartphone application for it that you can also download and put it onto your phone, and then you've actually got the ERG right in front of you on the telephone. Our website, the easiest way to get to our website is on your computer, just hazmat.dot.gov. Nothing more, don't need any of those wwws or anything like that. Just hazmat.dot.gov, and actually that provides you our entire website, where there's just a wealth of everything that we are talking about, but the ERG is very prevalent on that side. Thanks.
Yep, and then at the end of the ERG, I think on page 384, there's an email address that you can email, and not entirely sure they're going to ship you one overseas, but it's worth a shot. They might send you one if you email them and tell them you need a couple copies. I think it can be arranged, but
they're free.
Yeah, there is that. Next slide, please. Incident reporting is another sort of domestic, U.S. only requirement. However, it is interesting. I don't know. I believe most of you represent governmental agencies, but if you were to be a carrier, let's say a carrier that operates out of your country, and you're transporting a hazardous material into the U.S. and you observe a leaking or damaged package, you would be responsible for reporting it to us, essentially. Incident reporting is one of the most vital ways that we can justify making regulatory changes other than obviously a large scale incident that makes the news. A rail car blows up and unfortunately hurts a lot of people or something of that nature. But if we want to make a regulatory change, we have to justify that there's a safety concern for that in most cases. So we require incident reporting. The second bullet there, each person in physical possession of a hazardous material at the time that any of the following incidents occurs during transportation must submit a hazardous materials incident report. And the next slide, please. And here are the 5 conditions. I'm not going to bore you and read all of them, but the first includes major incidents. It's a loss of life, altering a plane's flight path, closing of a major transportation artery. I believe it's hospitalization for more than a day, things like that. And then 2 is the one that gets most people into having to report. It's any unintentional release of a hazardous material or the discharge of any quantity of hazardous waste. So if in our instance, I guess the most applicable to you would be if a carrier from your nation happened to be in our waters and noticed a leaking container or a leaking package, they would be responsible for submitting an incident report. And you can do that online at our website. There's an incident reporting page. A little bit of data you need. You need to know how much leaked, why do you think it leaked, was anyone hurt, this type of information, estimate of damage. But once again, it's important data because we use it to justify regulatory change. A few other things. Undeclared, you find undeclared hazardous material. There's a fire or a violent explosion, that type of thing. Next slide, please.
And I'll take over for a few moments here. Switch over and talk a little bit about the international role. Yeah, there was a time, and just not too long ago, where countries could be a little bit isolated and do their own things, and hence us having hazardous materials regulations that were originally applicable basically to the United States, but that can't be done anymore. The world is small. It's shrinking technologically. It's a world of trade now, not just maybe trade with your local partners and stuff. So to facilitate that, we have to have that globally harmonized system where, once again, yes, we're concerned about the transportation being safe within the United States, but we also want it to be safe everywhere else in the world, and anything coming in from anywhere else in the world to to be safe also. Next slide, please. So PHMSA's international role, we talked earlier about the Secretary of Transportation being responsible for hazardous materials under our law. And the Secretary of Transportation pretty much delegates that authority down to PHMSA and our associate administrator. So we designate, our role is to designate the materials that are hazardous in transportation, and a lot of that is through collaboration with the United Nations, and to prescribe the regulations for the transportation of those materials, the safe transportation. And then a very big part is participate in international forums to establish regulations and standards for worldwide transport of the hazardous materials. And in conjunction with that, consider, as we talked about, the safety and security requirements. And all of these things, once again, we're transporting a material that is a risk, but we have to do that in a way where it's efficient, effective, it keeps everybody globally competitive, and everybody safe and secure. Next slide, please. So we participate in the United Nations Subcommittee of Experts on the Transportation of Dangerous Goods. It was established back in 1954, and the UN model regulations, as they are called, were first published in 1957. Now, the model regulations are not necessarily themselves regulations. They are more like a recommended standard for countries to model their hazardous materials regulations off of. Once again, earlier on, the United States had its own domestically oriented set of regulations, our HMR, or Hazardous Materials Regulations, which we still call it. However, in 1991, we published a rulemaking, HM 181, back when I was still working on the highways and whatnot. And it was a very sweeping change where we revised our regulations substantially to harmonize as much as practicable with the United Nations model regulations. So, the objective is to enhance the safety through consistent regulation and improve compliance. So the model regulations, kind of just like our hazardous materials regulations had been, is a multimodal transport provision. In our hazardous materials regulations, we do address all of the modes: air, rail, vessel, and which one am I? And highway. And the basic classification criteria. Is a material hazardous, and if it is, how is it hazardous? Identification system, that dangerous goods list, our hazardous materials list. Packaging, how do you want to package that, to transport it, to contain it, and to keep it, keep it isolated and safe during transport? Marking, labeling, and placarding. Hazardous communications, HAZCOM we call it. Those items that tell a person, whether it's a person handling it, receiving it, shipping it, or responding to an incident if one were to occur, that indeed they do have a hazardous material, and how should they react to that. And then documentation, shipping papers, hand a person a paper that says, hey, this is what I have. You should be able to tell on that right away, that, if they do have a hazardous material on there. Once again, another form of hazard communication, and then those training and security requirements. So all of those items are within the UN regulations, within our regulations, and to the extent practicable are being harmonized throughout the organizations that participate in the UN. Next slide. And here are the participating countries. There are actually 28 countries that have voting status within the UN, and obviously United States being one of them, and there are other private, quasi-government, and government organizations that also participate in the UN.
And then just, if you don't see yourself on this list, that Vince will sort of explain in the next slide, but like the UN model regulations are considered a framework, and then that's trickled down into the IMO, the IMDG code, and to the air side, to the ICAO, and I believe probably every country in here is represented at the IMO, at our CCC, DSC, now CCC subcommittee, which addresses the changes to the maritime regulations. So just because the UN decides to do something doesn't mean it makes its way into the maritime regulations. In fact, sometimes we differ on the way things need to be implemented for the C mode. The larger things, the classification issues, should something be listed in the table at all, those things generally get harmonized between the model regulations and the maritime stuff. But just as an example, I think the UN decided to put in provisions for damaged and defective lithium batteries, and the C mode said, well, that's not really a great idea, but we'll let you do that for short sea shipping, but not for long international voyages. Not comfortable with that. So just an example. Sorry.
Next slide. Yes, and this is what Steve was talking about, and in the middle at the top of the slide is an example of the UN, the book, the UN model regulations. By the way, most of these, well, no, I shouldn't say that. The UN model regulations are available online also. Pardon? For free, yes. However, you cannot, there's limitations to what you can do with it, but it is available online. Yeah, from... model regulations. Yes, that on their website. Yes, you can get those, and those are used as the basis for other national regulations, as Steve said. There are times, in the United States or that other countries opt for their own national reasons not to completely harmonize, but for a very good part, harmonization with the UN model regulations is the, the rule as opposed to the exception. Most of them are relatively harmonized. Another issue that may occur is the lag time from when UN model regulations might be become effective in other countries depending upon their cycle or their ability to adopt into their regulations. They may be somewhat behind in those adoptions. So there can be differences based upon that. So other regulations are based upon the UN regulations, including the ICAO regulations and the IATA recommendations, the IMDG for vessel. There's an example of our Code of Federal Regulations, our U.S. regulations, and then the ADR, which is the road regulations for Europe. And as a side note, there is also a group in the UN called the Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, which is responsible for classifying chemicals. That portion of it, while it's associated with the UN, applies a lot to use of chemicals in the workplace in addition to transportation. Next slide.
So this, the UN, ICAO, IMO, they all operate on 2-year cycles. With the UN has 4 meetings, 2 meetings a year during this biennium. So all those member governments that you saw, the 26, I think, voting governments can bring papers and say, hey, we don't like how you transport lithium batteries. We don't think it's safe. We need you to do X, Y, and Z. Or they'll come and say, well, we would like an exception. We think we can do this a different way, or we want to get out of regulation if we perform this test, or whatever it might be. So those papers will get introduced at the UN. Generally speaking, there's no consensus on the first draft. People have to go back, edit the papers, and during that 2-year period, eventually they'll come to a consensus, yes or no. And this 2-year biennium that we're currently working on regulations for ended. It was 2011, 2012. They published the recommendations already in 2013, and the international regulations will enter into force January 2015. So the IMDG code, the ICAO will come into force January 2015. Next slide. So we at PHMSA take these changes that are made at the UN, the changes that are made at the International Maritime Organization, and the changes made by Civil Aviation, ICAO, and start a rulemaking. Not entirely sure how rulemaking works in all of your member countries here, but for us it's kind of a time-consuming process. There's public comment, there's digestion of those comments, you have to answer the comments, and so there's multiple steps involved in our rulemaking. But we're currently working on a rulemaking to address things that were done at the UN in 2011. So you can see how there's lag time here. I mean, these guys, they said, yes, we want to do this in 2011 and 12, and we're trying to get it implemented now. Luckily, it will be out in time to match the implementation date by the IMO and by ICAO. So theirs will become effective January 1st, 2015. Ours will as well. We just have to get going now, basically, to meet that deadline. And as the last bullet point there says, we don't harmonize strictly because the UN did it or the IMO did it. We look at each amendment on its face, and yes, the goal is to harmonize where possible and to facilitate commerce and trade internationally, but there are instances where safety outweighs whatever was done at the international community. The effect on domestic commerce sometimes comes into play, and then also if environmental impacts were possibly ignored, we may not harmonize as well. So next slide. We're nearing the end. This might be the last slide, actually. And so these are some things coming up. You may see some changes to Amendment 3714 to the IMDG code. I don't know, do any of you run port terminals? Does anybody work in terminals? No? Have terminals? Yes? Okay. So these are some things you may see coming in the next edition, well, you will see coming in 2015. So currently the IMDG code has segregation and stowage in column 16. It's all one column. It's actually pretty handy. It's in text. It tells you what you need to do: stow away from acids, segregate from flammable solids, whatever it might be. Well, now they've decided to split that column 16 into two columns. One that will be stowage and handling, and the second column will be segregation. And all of the text will be codified. They'll put it into code. So if it previously said stow away from acids, it will now say SG7, and then you need to flip back in the book and find out what SG7 is. Actually makes it harder to to figure out. I'm not entirely sure why they decided that they wanted to do it, but they did. So it's all going to be in codes now. They added a handful. We added a handful of new marine pollutants. So there's certain things. Without getting too in depth, marine pollutants meet a criteria to kill either a certain amount of crustaceans, algae, or I'm missing one. Crustaceans, algae, or marine, I guess fish. Yeah, fish. Over a certain amount of time when exposed to a chemical. And if you meet that criteria, you're a marine pollutant. You have to label it. You have to declare it. You have to do all these things. Well, we added a few things to a list of just predetermined. Normally, you have to test your material. You have to say, oh, I'm going to test it, and it's a marine pollutant or it's not. We added calcium hypochlorites, there's a bunch of those, pine oils, turpentine, and hydrous ammonia to the list of things that just based on their pure scientific data meet the definition of marine pollutants. One thing I didn't put on this list that may make a difference to you also deals with marine pollutants, and there's a blanket exception from regulation coming for inner packages of less than 5 kilograms or 5 liters of marine pollutants. You would not be subject to any regulation if you had just a box full of small bottles of things that are marine pollutants. What that may mean to you guys is you're going to see a lot less hazardous materials, a lot less containers that are declared as hazardous materials, because you could have people that only ship a freight container full of some sort of household cleaner that happens to be a marine pollutant. Well, all of those things are going to be in less than 5 liter inner bottles. So you can have a box that weighs 66 pounds but has 5 liter inners or less, and they would be accepted. So no marking, no paperwork, this, that, and the other thing. So you may see less hazmat declarations coming in. You may see less fees associated with that type of thing. So that's kind of big. The third bullet there, you may also see less things declared as vehicles. The IMO, fairly recently put vehicles, UN 3161, back into the IMDG code and regulated them, but with lots of exceptions. If you meet certain exceptions, you're not regulated. Well, we clarified, it cleaned up special provisions 961 and 962 to talk about when you're regulated as a vehicle and when you're not. And assuming you can meet a few basic conditions, like you can't run the thing, it stalls for lack of fuel. If you run on regular gas, if you run on diesel, you can have a certain amount and still be unregulated. So look for those clarifications. They may prove helpful. And then also some big changes to the segregation table, dealing with dangerous when wet materials. There's concern that the capabilities of the vessels to deal with fires are fairly limited, especially on deck. So we've basically decided to segregate 4.3s and 2.1s and 4.3s, which are dangerous when wets and flammable gases, and dangerous when wets and flammable liquids, to require additional segregation distances. You can't put them next to each other, on top of each other, that type of thing. So if there is a fire in a container that involves one of these two goods, let's say a fire breaks out in the 2.1 flammable gas container, well, you go to put it out, and next door to it is a dangerous when wet material. So now you get that soaking wet, and you've just made the situation worse. So you're going to see some changes in vessel stowage because of that. I think you're also going to see that the IMDG code does not allow you to put any goods which require any segregation from each other in the same transport unit. So people that previously shipped 4.3s and 2.1s together will not be able to do that anymore. I don't know who that affects. I don't know if it's a large subset of shippers, but there will be some changes due to that. And that's what we did in the last amendment. I don't know what's coming up. Nobody's really posted any papers, to be honest. I suspect we'll be cleaning up this vehicle stuff for a few more years, but I don't really know what's coming. Next slide. I think that might be it. Next slide. Oh, yes, this slide's fine. And you might want to take down this number. It's an 800 number. We have a 202 number too. I probably should put on there, but it's our Hazardous Materials Information Center, and it's a resource that's available from 9 to 5 Eastern Standard Time. I was just in there this morning, actually. It's staffed by one of our colleagues, a DOT colleague, and then a few contractors that are knowledgeable of hazardous materials regulations, both mostly domestically, but also internationally. And you can call and say, well, I have a shipment of 20 drums of methyl ethyl kill you, and how do I properly label it or segregate it, or whatever question you may have, however small or difficult it might be, they'll either get you the answer or track down someone who knows the answer within our agency. But a really good resource that's probably underutilized. And with that, I will open the floor to questions. And I think I need my headset probably. So.
Again, while the audience figures out the notes and digests a little bit of the information, comes up with a couple of questions. First, let me congratulate you and thank you both for the most informative presentation. We've been covering all sorts of topics and issues related to safety during the last couple of days. And evidently, what you guys try to do is you try to take not the mitigation part and the investigation part of an actual event like we had earlier speakers, but the preventive measures, which we had quite a bit of a talk last night about that, about preventing, like you just said, the separation and segregation of these things. It makes perfect sense for you not to put them together because of the reason you mentioned and any other reason. So I think that there's a lesson to be learned in that preventiveness that FEMSA tries to do. On the other hand, I have a couple of comments. First of all, there's two. One of them is you spoke, Steve, about the training and about FEMSA's sort of endeavor, if you will, in offering international or training to foreign nationals. Let me put it that way. So this is something that perhaps they would, the audience would like to hear a bit more about where they can sign up, or is there a possibility, or are these seminars that FEMSA conducts, frequently, and that people can't sign up? Maybe just a little more on that. And then just a comment. It seems to me that it's a very complex system with many variables, and it seems to me that responsibility lies largely with the shipper. 100% with me, with the guy that's going to ship it, and I could be a deceitful person right? And now my question to that is, because of that, do you all just, these hazmat containers are screened/scanned also at the tune of 10%, like pretty much the rest, or because they are hazardous materials, they follow a different protocol and perhaps have a more sort of frequent scanning? So, thank you.
Yeah, I suspect, I don't know the stats. I know you had originally scheduled to have someone from the Coast Guard's Hazardous Materials Division. I'm not sure they're available. I think their office is down to an office of one at the moment, and she may be over in London. But I'll take the second question first. As Vince mentioned, we do work with our modal partners, and they all we think of hazmat enforcement as it's a net. And everybody has their own little part. The modal agencies, FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, handles the air enforcement. So Coast Guard deals with the port side enforcement. And there are billets at all of our major sectors for container inspectors. and there are quotas that are assigned to those container inspectors for weekly inspections. I don't exactly know what those are. You could look in Commandant Instruction 1611B and probably figure that out. But and there's a screening criteria. It's based on the characteristics of the material. So we know that these are the more dangerous, more likely to be involved in incidents. We would like you to target these primarily first. So we want to look at flammable gases. We want to look at I don't know what's the top of that list anymore. It's been a while since I did this, but corrosives maybe. I don't know what's the top list, but it ranks them and it gives you sort of a hierarchy. And I don't think I'm outside the box in saying that Customs generally defers to those Coast Guard inspectors because of their training and background in inspection of hazardous materials. And most of them are physical inspections. Customs may do the VACUS type work, but you know, there's a common instruction from the Coast Guard that tells you, in doing these inspections, here's how you need to open the container, here's what you need to look for, here's how you air it, how long you air it out for, that type of thing. And they also participate in all these multi-agency strike force operations, these MASFOs that you may have heard multiple times probably. But we'll come in, the Coast Guard, sorry, that's my old role. Coast Guard will come in and look at the hazmat during these MASFOs and often lead the MASFOs. So yeah, number-wise, it's tough. There is a number. We report to the International Maritime Organization every year the number of containers inspected by the United States for hazmat, and that's publicly available through the IMO. I don't know what that number is. I think it's in the 20 to 30,000 range, I believe. So that's your second question, but you can find those numbers, and how many discrepancies we noted is also there. Yeah.
And just to expound on that a little bit too, and you were asking about the shipper, responsibilities. Yes, there is a lot of onus placed on that shipper and that shipper's honesty, for lack, However, there is one thing to keep in mind, and that is, the marketplace could tell on that. Unscrupulous shippers, are at way greater risk than than somebody who is complying. The purpose of the regulations are to comply and to enhance safety, not to provide something to look for a way to circumvent it. Okay. Now, that being said, as I also said, that is the one area where PHMSA does concentrate its enforcement efforts on the shippers, on package manufacturers, like in the cylinder areas of, overseeing, cylinder manufacturing and cylinder construction, doing inspections to make sure the packaging is correct. So that, while the modes do a lot of the in-transport, our PHMSA's enforcement side concentrates quite a bit on that shipper mode.
But yeah, if you think about vessel transport, it's sort of unique in response to your question about the onus on the shipper, because we have like a means of acceptance check in almost every other mode. The air modes will take a package, literally, like if you go to FedEx and hand them a package to put on a plane, they'll look at it and see that it has a label and look at the documentation and make sure it's right. Well, in a vessel mode and for highway, you're watching them loading it with a forklift a lot of the time, versus vessel mode, you get a closed freight container, right, with a seal on it, a customs seal, and you're not opening it to say, well, let me see, do you have 18 packages of methyl ethyl ketone? So yes, there is a lot of onus on the shipper to do the correct thing, but I think the overall safety record of these companies and the lack of serious vessel incidents sort of shows that the system's working, and that most of the discrepancies that are noted are minor, relatively minor, and people just not maybe knowing how to comply versus actively trying to circumvent the system or use incorrect packages. And on to your training question, we don't really do a lot of international outreach. It's all primarily domestic. We do have teams that conduct these seminars, and 3 or 4 times a year. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
You're speaking about the training, and then could you just, yes, about the training, please. I'm interested in that.
Okay. We offer, they're called, what are they called? They're called multimodal? multimodal training seminars, and we do them in different regions. So we'll usually do one in Atlanta or Miami, and then this is during the year. We'll do 3 a year. We'll do one in Atlanta, Miami, somewhere in that southern region. We'll do one up in Delaware or New York, and then we'll do one in California area, California, Oregon, Seattle, something like that, Washington. There really isn't much outreach outside of the U.S. The only thing I can think of, and this is still domestic, but we do some work in Puerto Rico and Guam and some of our territories where they've had some issues complying with certain cylinder provisions and whatnot. But I can't really think of much international outreach, primarily because the agencies, other than our little subgroup, is focused on the 48, 50 states, you know. So I don't know what we've got internationally. Am I missing anything?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the only other thing, you know, is that, you know, some of our training recommendations and, you know, and training requirements and some of the information that we have posted on our website concerning training, while it, you know, it is specific to our regulations, is certainly, you know, a lot of good information that would be useful to anybody to be able to glean the basics of you know, all of the various regulations, and to you know, and to use that as some at least, you know, background information.
Thank you both. I'm sure we'll have some comments. Y después usted, Capitán. So no, please go ahead, and then we'll have the captain go after.
Hello, yes. Ian Evans from Grenada. Do you have guidelines on hazmat in terminals? Because the IMDG and most of these codes are related to transport and vessels, but do not deal with segregation and separation in terminals, in particular in warehousing.
We do. Well, we don't. We do as the U.S. PHMSA doesn't. There are a few things in transportation that we delegate to other modes. This sort of in storage that you're mentioning is handled under, 33 or 46 CFR. You're calling, I don't know, I'm losing them. I know we have the Coast Guard here, but I don't know if this is particularly his area of expertise. But they are found in a completely different code of federal regulations that are managed by the U.S. Coast Guard. And it'll tell you how many containers you can stack on each other, and what kind of like aisles for fire safety you need. It's all these type of requirements. So I don't know. I'll give you my card. I can probably find that information when I get home, unless possibly the Coast Guard rep can help fill you in there.
Gracias. Capitán Casarrubias, capitán de Veracruz. Nos debe preocupar mucho el manejo de la carga peligrosa, porque en realidad es una amenaza a nuestros puertos. Cada día el manejo de carga peligrosa se incrementa a bordo del transporte marítimo. Usted mencionó algo que me llama mucho la atención al decir transportistas sin escrúpulos, y estoy totalmente de acuerdo. Créame lo que en los puertos mexicanos ha habido una escrupulosa revisión en que todo contenedor de carga peligrosa no desembarca o no embarca si no trae el correcto etiquetado que nos marque qué tipo de carga peligrosa está operando. Porque puede haber un accidente en carretera y no trae la etiqueta y no sabe la autoridad de protección civil cómo controlar una emergencia que puede poner en riesgo a una población. Aquí hemos operado inclusive por Veracruz carga peligrosa del tipo 1, los explosivos, 7 los radioactivos, con todos los permisos respectivos, donde interviene, aparte de la Secretaría de Comunicaciones, la Secretaría de Marina, la Policía Federal, la Protección Civil, todo un manejo de autoridades con el fin de que ese contenedor, esa carga, salga y sea perfectamente vigilada hasta su embarque o hasta su destino final.
Sí, es muy importante que las terminales cuenten con personal especializado para el manejo de una emergencia de este tipo de mercancías y no nomás se lo dejen a la central de emergencias con la que cuentan los puertos. Se tiene que normar o regular a través de la OMI ciertos mecanismos para que sea muy exigible, porque ahí me queda claro que los capitanes de los buques somos escrupulosos en la segregación y en la separación de esta carga. Para mí como autoridad marítima mi preocupación es cuando el contenedor lo bajan a tierra, lo maneja la terminal y como siempre están saturadas, pues como decimos en México, de chile dulce de manteca, es una revoltura espantosa y eso hay que tener mucho cuidado para evitar ese tipo de problemas. Finalmente yo le quisiera preguntar, ¿hay alguna regulación en el transporte terrestre en Estados Unidos donde hay un límite de tonelaje para un contenedor de 20 y de 40 pies? Hay un máximo de tonelaje para operar ese tipo de carga. Y la otra también, el comentario, no se comentó o no escuché de los cargas peligrosas que caen en abandono en los puertos. Y eso también tiene que tener vigilancia especial para el manejo inmediato y la salida de los puertos, porque no es posible que a veces los clientes ya no le convienen y dejan el contenedor en abandono con el grave riesgo de lo que pueda suceder poniendo en alto riesgo a la población, ¿no?
Oh, yeah, I can do some, you know. Yeah, on some general response. Um, yes, I agree completely. The hazard communications requirements are oh so important to make sure that they're there and they're visible. That is that's an item. You talked about highway, inspections and containers getting out onto the roads. That's one of the things that I did for years and years, and we relied so much upon having that hazard communications available to us and really concentrated on that whenever we were looking at shipments of hazardous materials. We had an advantage in the state where I was at, where we had the authority to open the shipping containers when they were being transported, and we were able to check that to make sure that those things, what was listed on a shipping paper and what was communicated on the vehicle was what was actually being transported, and that it was being transported, loaded, segregated in a safe manner. However, one of the things that I think everybody continues to grapple with is the issue of, boy, you've already got the container in your hands. When you're looking at it and trying to verify that it is correct, there's been a lot of talk, and I don't know how much of progress. I've been out of the security fields for a while, but a lot of talk more about inspecting containers at their point of origin before they get out and get transported, as opposed to at their destination where, as I say, they're already there, and if there's something within that container of malintent, that it's already gotten into your hands. So that's something I think for everybody to consider, the going forward into the future of, where really is the appropriate place to conduct inspections of these shipments. Is it maybe better to do it at point of origin? You asked about size and limitations on highways. Normally in the United States, A general rule of thumb for like our full-size tractor trailers are like 80,000 pounds is a maximum gross weight that would be for the vehicle and its its load and its cargo. Normally, in the United States now, a trailer length of maximum of 53 feet is kind of the norm. 53 feet by 8 foot 6 inches wide is kind of the normal, in our country. Okay. And then keep in mind that 80,000 pounds that I said, that is gross weight, and that gives you what, 50,000 pounds for load. Drop out 26 to 30,000 pounds for the vehicle, so about 50,000 pounds useful load there.
And to continue on with the tonnage conversation, you may want to keep an eye out. I don't know where this ended up because this happened at the same subcommittee that makes the IMDG changes, but I was in a different committee. There's a new requirement for containers prior to being offered to a carrier. You have to have a verifiable weight somewhere on some sort of documentation. So you're going to have either, and they give options. There's an option for either literally weighed. You took the container, you drove it on a scale, you have a weight certificate, or it was contentious, but this stayed in. You could have the tare weight of the container, the weight of one pallet, you put 8 pallets in, you could still calculate it. But there has to be an indication somewhere. It's intended to prevent, stabilization issues, things like that. You lift the container and the goods fall out the bottom, all of the stuff that can very well happen. I honestly don't know where that's going to end up. I suspect it's in Solus. Like I said, I just wasn't on that committee, so I don't know. But keep an eye out for that, because it's a change for vessel transport at least. And your questions on training, I'm not entirely sure how to answer the question about facility members needing specialized training. I agree with you. And I believe the IMDG code requires that those personnel that have an impact on transportation safety, i.e. literally the people with the cranes that are picking up the containers, anybody that might be maybe moving things around the terminal, would have that hazardous materials training, that function-specific training, and that general awareness training. So I think there are some people that are required to have that training already. But I do believe that it would be a good thing for terminal operators to keep things like this ERG guidebook handy, and to maybe run some drills or do familiarization with what do I do, have the contact numbers for these emergency, not only local emergency responders, but maybe cleanup companies or things like that can help in the event of spills and releases. And that ties into your what do you do with abandoned hazmat question. And this is one that's bugged me since my container inspection days, because there's not really a good answer from the regulatory side yet. It's an issue where you'll have a shipper, a container gets put on hold. You need to repackage something. It's in the wrong package, and they just go, well, I'm not doing that. Like, that's going to cost me way more than the cargo is even worth, or, I'm not dealing with the fines, and just leave it. And the only recourse for the facility is to, either contract it out or have it done and then eat the cost, right? It's got to get done. You're not going to let it sit there forever. And unfortunately, that's legitimately the only answer that exists at the moment. Obviously the way you recoup that is, hazmat fees, hopefully cover some portion of that. You factor all that in as to this might happen once every X amount of incidents. And then secondly, obviously do not accept cargo from that particular offer anymore. That's the recourse there, I think, that you have. But I don't know how we can really address that from a regulatory standpoint. I'm welcome to ideas, but I don't know what that answer is. It's very similar in nature to who pays for response costs in a situation like that. You get a container, it starts to leak, and all of a sudden you try and reach out to the shipper, and they're just not answering, or you can't get hold of them. How do you make them pay for that emergency response or that cleanup that you had to do? I don't know the answer to that either. It's a good question, and maybe it's something we should work on. Yes, sir.
Unfortunately, because of time constraints, we're going to hold all questions until the general Q&A afterwards. Our Coast Guard friends, we're kind of running a little bit behind, so they're going to come up and speak. So any questions we'll hold till the end. So I'd like to thank Vince and Steve for their time, for coming. Don't run.
One English copy if anybody wants it.
Don't run away yet. We have certificates of participation from Steve. All right, we're going to move on to the last speakers we'll have this afternoon. We have Mr. David Condino from Coast Guard, who we heard from yesterday, as well as Lieutenant Commander Darwin Jensen from the Coast Guard, who is joining us as well. I'll let them introduce themselves and run with it from here.
So you've probably already been introduced to Mr. Dave Condino, and I know we've been going for a very long time. I could use a break. In fact, I think we could all use head, shoulders, knees, and toes right now to get the blood going. My name's Lieutenant Commander Darwin Jensen. I work for the United States Coast Guard. I do cargo facilities, safety, and security. So some of the questions that were answered earlier, I could probably go into more detail if you want after our presentation. Mr. Duran and I have something in common. We both speak Swedish, so if the interpreters could do Swedish, no, okay, we'll stay with English. There's not many people that can speak that. We're glad that we could be here, and we chose a topic on marine transfer facilities and liquid natural gas. Mr. Condino is going to start speaking, but we chose this topic because it's one that's up and coming. When we complete this, if you have any questions on other topics, we'll be happy to address them.
And you all know me. I saw you all yesterday. I'm glad to be back. And I promise you, we're going to be, this is a brief presentation. As the commander said, this is another area for our branch. We work together on various things. We heard about environmental issues that we work on yesterday. And we chose this topic and to follow the PHMSA presenters from DOT to highlight one particular area of hazardous material transfers. And it's an area that's been in the news lately. And it's been in the news because of environmental concerns about clean air. It's been in the news because there are resources in all of the Americas tend to indicate that there is a lot of oil around, and along with oil and the technological energy extraction developments of the last few years, we've been able to extract the natural gas that comes with oil drilling that heretofore hasn't been. So LNG, natural gas in the liquefied form is what we're going to talk about, and specifically, as the commander said, for marine transfers, and it's the marine transfer from a facility to a vessel, or from a vessel to a facility. So it's going to be, at least it's purported to be, a very big issue, especially here in the Americas, because we have a lot of it. Next slide. So our office, Office of Port Facility Compliance, we are responsible for compliance, obviously, within the ports, and that would mean, and it would indicate, things like regulations, policy, inspections, guidance, and standards. Next slide. So what we want to talk about here specifically, and in terms of LNG at our ports and marine transfers of LNG from or to a facility, from or to a vessel, are the existing regulations that we have. LNG's been around for a long time. North America, specifically the United States, has been in the past a large importer, and so regulations were written for that. So what we're going to do today is look at some of those regulations, how they might apply in their application to liquefaction facilities. Those are the facilities that take natural gas or methane, and liquefy it. Why would we want to liquefy it? Anybody that's had any worked at all with LNG knows that in its liquid form, it's cryogenic, but B, it's easier to transport. It's easier to ship. It's also the volume is much less, of course. One of the challenges is, of course, that it's cryogenic, minus 270, I believe, Fahrenheit. So what are some of the considerations for natural gas liquids? And that is one major consideration, obviously, but not an insurmountable technological challenge, because there is equipment that's already been developed, has been developed for years to handle it. We want to talk a little bit about deep water ports, and then we want to talk a little bit about security. So lots of objectives. Next slide. Commander, do you want to talk about our 133 CFR 127 regulations?
So the United States developed a long time ago the ability to regulate liquid natural gas as it's shipped in bulk. One of the challenges that we have had recently is, as we talk about shipping liquid natural gas or using it as a fuel, it obviously comes in much smaller quantities. So currently in the regulations we have 33 CFR 127, and it has general requirements for shipping liquid natural gas in bulk. And what we're trying to do is adapt those current regulations so that they can be a little more user-friendly for what we would use as a fuel on board a vessel. And in doing that, we're trying to address things like design and construction of the vessel, the equipment that's used to do it, maintenance, personnel training for those who are both on the vessel and have to deal with the fuel, and those who are on the vessel and just have to know about the fuel, firefighting, and security. So we have all those areas we're looking at addressing, and as part of that, I think we'll get to a slide later on about some of the actions that we're taking. Next slide. I'm going to go really fast so that we can get back on track. Does that sound good? Good. All right. So part of the general requirements for 127 is that there is a letter of intent that has to be submitted by the facility. The facility generates a document that says this is what we plan to do, how much we plan to transfer, and then they provide it to the Coast Guard and to FERC. What does FERC stand for?
Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. That's our that's our energy, one of our energy agencies. So it's a commission, and that's one of the main permitting agencies that allows permitting of facilities that would export or import natural gas, liquefied natural gas or natural gases.
And as part of that, the shipper also does what's called a waterway suitability assessment. What they do is they tell us, the Coast Guard, what type of traffic and other facilities are in the area and how that impacts what they will be doing, how the traffic will impact the shipment of natural gas, and potential problems, if any exist, in that waterway. Next slide. Mr. Condino?
Yeah, so what are we talking about here? We're talking about a port, and we're talking about an area within the port, and the ship comes up, and we're going to transfer, and either the ship is going to load it to the port into a storage facility, or the port's going to load it onto the ship. And what we're really going to be talking about here in a little bit is, in a marine transfer for fuel, is going to be basically a port facility transferring to a ship. So where does the jurisdiction from our colleagues at PHMSA, which might be controlling the pipeline or the rail car, or the over-the-road truck, where does that jurisdiction end and where's the Coast Guard jurisdiction begin? And that is at the marine transfer area. There's some specific language, the first valve inside the containment area being where the whatever the storage unit is. So it's there. But mainly what we're talking about is the actual equipment that is transferring. The pipe from the container, but not necessarily the storage container itself, and then wherever that valve is that turns it on, and then all the way out to the ship and everything and on the ship. So that's where the Coast Guard has its jurisdiction. Next slide. Want me to continue? All right. So, one type of facility is, and we mentioned this earlier, is a liquefaction facility, and this is a facility that is going to, for the purposes of a marine transportation facility, to liquefy to actually produce from the gas the liquefied hazardous gas resulting from liquefaction. Excuse me. I am sorry. A little bit tongue-tied there.
This
So,
word might take us a while.
natural gas and waterfront storage capacity is an issue, and liquefied hazardous gas transfers is an issue. This can happen at a liquefaction facility. But basically, it's a facility that takes the gas either out of a pipe from whatever the source is, and that source is not regulated, turns it into a gas that's going to be for marine transport, and it's going to involve a marine transfer at a port. Next slide, finally. You can go ahead.
Well, this is similar to what we stated before. 33 CFR covers all of these different areas in depth, but mostly what it does is it requires the facility to come up with answers or solutions to all of these different things in line with current standards, industry standards, and regulation requirements. Next slide. Boy, this looks awful familiar.
So again, I mean, there are some general requirements. Again, we're talking about a letter of intent, waterway suitability, and this is for all kinds of hazardous gases. And there's a different section of the regulation that does that. So it's 127 has several parts to it, and the application it's carefully reviewed. Next slide.
Excellent. So one of the things that, now we're starting to get into the fun stuff. 33 CFR, these parts right here, 148 to 150, talk about deep water ports. Deep water ports are anything that's seaward of the state jurisdiction line, anything that's shore side of that line, which is generally 3 nautical miles from shore, except for a couple of states like Florida, and I believe Texas have up to 9 miles that they claim as state waters. Anything shoreward of that is not considered a deep water port. Everything seaward of that is considered a deep water port. These particular regulations handle those particular ports. Next slide. All right, maritime security. One of the things that is important to remember with LNG is that if it's not handled correctly, or if somebody wanted to use it adversely, it has a tendency to cause big problems. So what we've done is we've incorporated within the security within 33 CFR 127, there are some security requirements. But the newly developed after 9/11 regulations in 101 through 106 are also incorporated as part of the facility requirements. So a facility that handles liquid natural gas or other hazardous material are required to follow the 105 regulations as well as those that are found within the regulations for that specific facility. Next slide. You have a question? Okay. Mr. Condino?
So, lots of regulations are going to apply here. And within the Coast Guard in the LNG regulatory and enforcement responsibilities area, there are, and you can see the bullets here, vessel and facility operating standards. That's one office that does that. Another section of that office looks at the deep water standards, which we've been mentioning. Human element and ship design, another office within the Coast Guard. Commercial and vessel compliance, and that's the vessel area, and then our office, port and facility compliance. So we're all working together on all of these separate issues on the areas of that are applicable in CFR 127, Parts A and C, Parts A and B. And we're working together within it. We're also working externally with our partners, DOT, PHMSA, and the other agencies that have some jurisdictions, regulatory or otherwise. Next slide. This is just a listing, and it's for your information. You'll get a copy of this. We're not going to go through every one of these, but here are some of the applicable regulations and standards. And it's a good list. It's a current list. And I'll just say right here that we're going to talk in just another slide or two about a new ABS report on North American LNG for bunkering, and I just plagiarized this list right from them because they did such a good job. We helped them with it, but I just wanted to, full disclosure. At any rate, next slide. So this is the emerging issue here, and it's liquefied natural gas fuels. What are we looking at? What are the issues involved here? I'll let the commander hit some of these bullets.
So one of the things that is really driving this is in August 2012, the North American Emissions Control Act is coming into effect. And as a lot of you know, that the restrictions on air emissions is going to continue to get tighter and tighter over time. And so one way that industry has found that potentially can help meet the requirements is by using liquid natural gas as part of their fuel system. And as they use that, that helps to bring down the emissions without having to do some expensive modifications to the vessel, especially if they use it in tandem with the fuels that they're currently using. We're also seeing an increase of natural gas being used in the other modes of transportation also, including rail and vehicles. Next slide.
What about liquefied natural gas as a fuel? We've already stated, the maritime industry is seeking other methods to incorporate the use of natural gas as a marine fuel. Why? We got a lot of it. It's probably cheaper, and it burns cleaner. I mean, those are the real drivers here. And why do we want it to burn cleaner? Because we got these things like ECAs down in. We've got an ECA around the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. We have them up in the northeast at Pacific. Emission control areas. Got to burn clean fuel. This is a good way to do it, and it may be cheaper because we have it. So economic drivers and environmental drivers. Right now, what we're looking at is developing where necessary policy and standards to ensure safety, security, and environmental stewardship. And looking specifically at transfer operations to and from waterfront facilities. We have put out a Federal Register notice already, and it's just this year regarding policy letters 0114 and 0214. Someone mentioned earlier about the challenges of creating new regulations. We have a regulation in place, 127, 33 CFR 127. It was written for those big bulk transfers we spoke about initially. It doesn't fit everything that we needed to address the issues for these small transfers, as Commander said. We're looking to that, but part of the process is we're looking for public comment. These are the policy letters have been out for comment, and they are on the docket. That 79 Federal Register 7470, 7 February 2014 is available on U.S. It's the U.S. government website. We're also looking at transfer operations that may include both liquefied natural gas and compressed natural gas, the same set of regulations, 126, 33 CFR 126 for compressed natural gases, and 33 CFR 127. The realm of hydrogen gases and some parts of 33 CFR 156 will apply. And will include the use of small-scale liquefaction, which we already talked about, plants to produce LNG for use as a marine fuel. Next slide.
So we do want to throw something out there. The American Bureau of Shipping Consulting has put together a report on bunkering of liquefied natural gas fuels. It is an excellent report. It goes through some of the requirements the U.S. has, and it outlines per modal how those requirements apply to both facilities and to vessels, and how that might apply if they were going to do something within U.S. at the U.S. facilities. It might be something good to look at and maybe gauge of how that might apply to some of the things that you have within your ports. That report is available online. It's free. And it's something that they have said to us that they're going to continue to update. So LNG, because it's such a new thing, is moving quickly, and things change quicker than we can actually change with them. And so they've committed to keep this report up to date, to kind of keep in line all those things that that have to deal with using LNG as a fuel. Next slide.
So, what is the Coast Guard? What has the Coast Guard been doing, and what do they do? And we spoke about training earlier. So these are some of the things that the Coast Guard has a cadre of trained inspectors, and I will let the commander, who is in charge of that program and has been down to our training facility in Yorktown.
We train. Has anybody been to the training facility in Yorktown, Virginia, or anybody sent anybody? Excellent. We actually do have a program for having international students come to our classes and participate in them, and I highly recommend, and if you're interested in it, you can reach out to myself or Mr. Condino, and we can see if we can get you a seat in it. As we train the inspectors, we look at all the different types of transfers that are happening and try to produce the best job aids and whatever is needed to help them to perform their mission. And as we're doing that, we're currently working on training aids for transferring liquid natural gas, and that is part of our training there. Next slide. One of the things that we've noticed, and I'll take this one because I like it. One of the things that we've noticed is, and I apologize for the colors on here, you can't see it real well, but the green line there is the number of incidences. Actually, the green line is transfer, I can't even see it, is transfer monitors. The white line is vessel incidents of spills, and the blue line is facility incidents of spills. What we've noticed over the years is that the more that we monitor transfers, which is why we do the training in Yorktown, we have a dramatic decrease in the number of spills that happen within our harbors, both with vessels and with facilities. So what we are doing is we're working to reinvigorate our transfer monitor program, where our guys go out to the facilities, they look at the transfer operations from the perspective of the vessel and the facility, verify that they're in compliance with current regulations, and then watch that transfer. And when they do that, we've noticed a dramatic decrease in incidences as we watch to see what happens at the transfers. Next slide. All right, we tried. I heard some questions earlier that I wouldn't mind addressing if you'll permit me, and I wrote them down. A couple of things is you had mentioned containerized cargo, and it seemed like that seems like a pretty hot topic as far as how containerized cargo is addressed in the United States. That's one of the things that we do. We train in fact, we just wrote a new instruction for inspecting containerized cargo. And we have what's called a techniques and procedures guide that we have just written, literally going to be approved hopefully in the next 5 days, on how to do container inspections. And as part of that, the United States is adjusting the way that we target containers. We recognize that right now we can't do 100% of the container traffic that's out there. But when we look at the risk that's happening, that the people who are shipping hazardous material and declaring hazardous material are not having the problems. If you look at the statistics, what they bear out is undeclared hazardous material. We're seeing a lot of incidences in recent years where cargo that was hazardous material inside of a container but was not marked, was not declared on the shipping papers, has caused serious problems on ships and at facilities. Not to mention the weight not being correct. As mentioned earlier, the IMO is now adopting and should be adopting a practice of verifying the weight of containers as they're shipped into the United States and throughout the world. So before a container is being shipped, it should be weighed, or a way to calculate that weight has to be verified, and then that will be weighed once it gets to the facility and weighed once it exits to help to determine if that tear is correct. The other side of the coin is, like I mentioned earlier, we're shifting our perspective a little bit, and we're looking more at general cargo containers and opening those containers up to see what's inside to verify that what's being shipped in there is not hazardous material, and to verify that what's being shipped in there is being packaged correctly. So that's one of the things that we've recognized in the United States, is shifting that focus of what used to be 90% hazardous material and 10% general cargo to a 50-50 focus of looking at 50% general cargo and 50% hazardous material. We've also worked on it's a pretty ingenious goal calculator. Knowing that we can't get at 100% of the containers, we found a way to randomly select within each of the individual ports based on the amount of containers that flow through that port. So if a container port has 100,000 containers that go through it, we want to inspect the number in association with the number of containers that are being shipped through it. So our goal calculator adjusts according to the number of containers that are being shipped, and it adjusts in accordance with how much partnership that we're working with the different agencies within the United States. So if our inspectors are working closely with CBP, with the National Cargo Bureau, and with other agencies that are looking at containers, then we adjust our numbers to reflect the number of inspections that are being done by other agencies so that we're not duplicating effort.
Do you have the authority under law to go in a container without CBP present?
Yes, we do. Is that a good answer? I didn't make it long. I just, yes. Yeah. Anything that's offered for shipment in the United States can be inspected by the Coast Guard. So by offering it for shipment, they're allowing the Coast Guard to inspect it.
If I may, James, before you go on, just a couple, an announcement. We have Commander Jensen and Captain Condino as the last presenters for today, and go on asking questions a little bit. It seems a little bit silly to break for coffee and come back in for 20 minutes. So we're just going to run straight until, and then remember we have Mayor Ferrer back there also, and he could come up here for the Q&A in case people have questions for. But this way, we'll just go on the Q&A answer and be done by, let's say, 4:10, another half hour at the most. And that way, gentlemen, you get a free afternoon to go. So enjoy the weather, right? So we'll just keep going, and please feel free to, in addition to Captain Condino and Commander Jensen here, to ask and direct questions to Mayor Ferrer, who's hiding from us back there, but he's back there. So thank you, James. Please.
Yeah, not a question, just a quick observation, which I think is great that the Coast Guard, in my experience, also has sent at least a number of officers to the Star Center and other training facilities. And I apologize if that was already mentioned, but I wanted to highlight that to sit alongside and go through the exact same training programs that the American and international officers do to become PICs with LNG transfers. And I think that's a perfect example of the Coast Guard having a comprehensive training program for their future inspectors.
Hello.
Good comment.
This is directed to the good captain. I would like to express my disagreement with LNG is very easy or just as safe as any other cargo ship. I'm from Trinidad. It's not my port, it's the other port, the port of Point Fortin. And we have business with Atlantic LNG. We don't own any cargo ships, but it is very, very, very difficult to conduct that business in terms of compliance, especially with the United States. I have here a list of laws and codes and that you have to comply with. But my interest really is that in the port of Port of Spain, we are thinking about being a bunker station as an added an attractiveness, and we are considering that we should be an LNG bunker port. I don't know. I have to do a business study on that, and it's like, you know, it's a nightmare for me. I don't know where to start. You know, maybe if you can probably point me to some direction or help, because I have to weigh this with other established bunkers, especially with the requirement in, I think it's 2015 or 2016, the 0.1% of sulfur. So this is very much applicable to me and my port, and we will be considering that. So I don't know if you can help, or maybe you could speak after or sometime.
Well, certainly, I mean, you raised several important issues. Now, are you agreeing with us or disagreeing with us about this safety issues? I wasn't.
I'm agreeing.
You're agreeing.
Yeah.
There are important safety issues. What we have discovered with, especially with LNG as a fuel, the current regulations were written for LNG as a cargo. That's cargo and fuel are different. 33 CFR 127 was written mainly because of the, and it was as an importer of cargo, mainly. Very large ships, and we saw a couple of examples there coming to U.S. ports. And so more cargo, more risk. There have been some studies done, and also that has been ongoing for a decade at least, in terms of, or more, large cargo ships coming in to ports. We haven't had a serious incident. We haven't seen the kind of incident that is there. Now, is that prevention? Is that good regulations? We can debate that. Smaller quantities for fuel, bunkering operations. A ship that's using fuel, that's using LNG as fuel and only fuel, is going to have a much smaller quantity. so is the risk less, and we're evaluating those things. We think that we do have to do a risk evaluation on that, and we're currently in the middle of that. We'll be issuing some regulations that apply just to LNG bunkering, which the commander mentioned. And so what I would say to you as a trading partner, clearly those are, I mean, we don't handle that, but we develop regulations that perhaps we're looking at that in our interagency partners. We are looking at trade. We want to facilitate trade within the U.S. and with our trading partners throughout the world, and certainly, especially within the Americas, because you are our closest and we have the gas. We know it's going to move there, and we're looking at that. We mentioned FERC. FERC is the agency that, and they're the permitting agency on the U.S. side. And I believe that FERC has the authority to develop bilateral trade agreements and approve those. And those are some of the things that I am aware of, although we are not the experts. So in terms of safety, we'll be developing regulations, and certainly they'll be available, publicly available, and certainly if you have questions, we would answer
Captain,
them.
I must hasten to add that you made a salient point that one is bunker and one is cargo. But the new design LNG tankers, they have boil off and they use the same, they use the cargo. So it is the same thing, cargo, bunker. It will definitely have the same connotations in terms of safety and also risk, because it can be a huge bomb.
And I would like to add the ABS report on bunkering is again, very good report in directing how things are bunkered and transferred. And then I would also say that myself, I'm going over to Finland hopefully going over to Finland in a couple of weeks to look at their operations, because they've been doing ferry operations with LNG fueled vessels for quite some time, Finland, Sweden, and Norway. And Wärtsilä is the company, and they're actually offering, and I know they've reached out to different entities. I would highly recommend getting in contact with them and seeing what they'd be willing to do, because again, they're trying to get the information out there, training, and maybe help people get started.
Thank you. That's to the Lieutenant Commander. Commander, St. Lucia is on the verge of acceding to the Bankers Convention, and part of the steps is that we're trying to acquire the capacity building even before we go and sign into the convention, that to ensure that we can meet some of the procedures that are enshrined in the Bankers Convention. So we'd like to place on record in terms of St. Lucia's interest as far as the inspection regime being offered by the U.S. Coast Guard, because I was one of those persons who benefited a few years ago from doing the ship inspector at the facility you mentioned early on. And I think in the Caribbean region there is quite a need or requirement to have continued port state inspectors, because there's you find persons getting trained after what they're going into the private sector. So there's always a requirement and a need to continue getting training and also capacity building for all the islands. So I'd like to place on record or on the burner, or as a flag it as a priority in terms of St. Lucia's desire to access that training that you spoke about for the port state inspectors, because we have had new guys entering the maritime administration. So I think it's commendable that the U.S. Coast Guard would continue offering that program, and apart from being a sidebar, I wish to bring it in the public forum in terms of what you have done for the training, and hoping that it can be extended towards the Caribbean islands as well.
Ditto for Jamaica.
I appreciate that. I go down and speak at every course for the facility side, and I've had the pleasure of meeting people from all over the world who've participated in our courses. And as we put on these courses, each time that I go down and speak with them, we try to find out what's moving, what's on the edge, so that we can try to keep our training current and appropriate. And so that's one of my challenges as the program director, is to make sure that that training addresses things like LNG as a fuel, which I'll be going down in next week to talk to the facility inspectors, and that's one of the topics that I'll be addressing. And then we also, when we talk about explosives and different ways for risk-based management of those as they move through our ports and other items, we try to do that.
Commander, just a follow-up question. Commander, I can recall a few years ago, the U.S. Coast Guard, even when at the time I was also in the Coast Guard, there was a roving U.S. training team. Because in terms of probably having Caribbean persons go to the U.S., which is a kind of expensive, the idea was to have a U.S. roving team to come in the islands. So you could have, these islands could have come maybe to one spot. It would have more persons trained. So you have about 3 or 4 persons from the U.S. Coast Guard with the expertise coming to the Caribbean region and offering that training for about maybe a week or the duration of the course. I think it would be more, it would be even more feasible and even more in terms of economics, have a greater number of persons accessing that training. So I think I can suggest to you respectfully that that's an area maybe we can revisit for us to at least create a greater capacity for the Caribbean region. Thank you.
I will take that back. I know the guy that does that, so.
In fact, if I may, to Major Ferrer, on the issue of training and possibilities, Major Ferrer, he mentioned that the Port of Miami has an MOU with the Department of State, if I'm not mistaken, through which some training for foreign nationals may be done in certain areas. And I'm sure you won't have the info now, but if you could please send it over so that we could share it with the participants, and then they would follow whatever procedures they need to in order to be able to compete or apply to these courses. But it would be wonderful and very, I'd be very grateful if you guys can get those links or that information to me so that then I disseminate them, not only amongst the present, but also amongst the absent as well. Thank you.
On that note, I know that Barbados is awaiting a response, because I am aware that our IPSLO, who was in Barbados in January, she indicated that she had made a request to the Port of Miami for us to access said training. So we are awaiting a response. So maybe I can get that response directly this afternoon.
Thank you all. All right, well, I think, Professor, please.
Bueno, es un gran tema, sin duda, el tema del gas natural.
My high school Spanish isn't as good as it used to be.
All right. Okay, sin duda es un gran tema el asunto del gas natural como combustible. Bueno, hay presiones en el mundo marítimo para una transformación. La MERS incluso hay un manifiesto que tiene tiempos para ir reconvirtiendo la industria marítima. Esto va a obligar a los puertos del mundo a tener, manera de darle respuesta a los barcos, o cómo se ve desde el punto de vista de ustedes el asunto del abasto para todas las embarcaciones que en un momento determinado deban de tener suficiente combustible para ir y regresar a puntos estratégicos. ¿Cómo se ve desde ese punto de vista?
Want me to go? I'll start out. You can finish it. Yeah, that's an excellent question. And the way we frame it right now, and I've heard the expression used several times, it's a bit of the chicken and egg syndrome. Which comes first? You know, the infrastructure or the ships? And the shipbuilders and the ship owners are saying, well, we want to do this, and a few are coming along. And the infrastructure is coming along, the suppliers, liquefaction facilities a few here, a few there. It probably is going to be, the commercial drivers are going to sort out uh, the the process. Once it gets rolling, I would imagine that it's going to take off, and it's going to be the industry initiative, and it will be, and it's what we've tried to explain. It'll be the Coast Guards and other agencies that will be trying to meet the needs in terms of the safety, security, and environmental protection requirements that go along with allowing those projects to go forward. It'll be the same in every country that's doing that. Fortunately, we've got some track record. Commander mentioned Europe, and the northern countries have been using this for some time. So we're looking to all of these. The ABS, this new report, very good information. So at least on our side, we'll probably be able to keep up. But it's going to be, the commercial side is going to have to work out who's going to be here first. And I suspect that, as they have in the past, that they will do that.
Just one comment. I think the developing countries will find it very difficult in the future when it comes to these vessels transforming into LNG fuel. I think we know that the supply of LNG for the next 5-10 years has already been purchased, and the demand for it will go up and the cost will go up. So developing countries will have a problem when it comes to cost of shipping into our country. So we have to look at that for our own development.
Yep.
Yeah, I know of some countries right now that are looking at trying to find ways to get LNG into their country or propane into their country to use for energy sources. And so there's two things. One, to go back to the comments that the Captain made earlier, right now what's limiting LNG is the range of the vessels, because LNG has to be kept in a cryogenic state in order for it to be usable for a long period of time. So construction and range of vessel is limited by the amount of LNG that can be put on board. So the long-range vessel traffic has still got a ways to go before they can convert and be able to carry the amount of LNG that they'll need. So we've still got a little bit of development to go. The other side of the coin is I know that I can't talk to any specifics, but I know some companies are looking at developing floating liquefaction facilities. In fact, if you look in the news, I think Australia has got one of the first one of those that's actually operating and producing several barrels of liquid natural gas. I think down the road we're going to see that more as an option, possibly where maybe one country can't afford to have something like that, but a floating liquefaction or deep water port would be available that vessels could stop at and fuel as they move through their trade processes.
I also, just to add to that, there is, when you read the trades and you look at the news, there is apparently a great deal of natural gas available. It takes certainly some political will. It takes some commercial enterprise to make it available. But indications are that it's going to be good for everyone. And as the commander says, as new developments and new technologies come online, like floating liquefaction plants that can be easily located and provide healthy, economically feasible supplies for lots of places. And we've seen some proposals already come forward in that respect. But here in the Americas, it certainly is, it really is in the nascent stages. It's really just getting started. So we certainly, in the U.S., I think we're certainly committed to ensuring, as I've said before, safety, security, and environmental protection, but also, and this is one of the main tenets of how the Coast Guard operates, we want to ensure that commercial operations can do this, keep shipping on the move, and keep it reasonable. That's also part of our job.
Great. Well, again, I think that we've had most excellent tandem of speakers here. Jag måste säga tack till min kompis Jansen. Därför I just wanted to see if you guys were paying attention.
But the translators are happy
The
with you now.
translators are like, what? No, that's Swedish. We happen to speak Swedish, so we kid around with that a little bit. No, again, thank you, David, and thank you, Darwin, for a very thorough presentation and of course, the disposition to be able to provide some guidance as requested and some information on those training opportunities for me to disseminate. So thank you very much, both of you. As we would say in Swedish, tack så mycket. Thank you very much. And of course, thank you all. Thank you, Major Ferrer, for a most comprehensive presentation there. Again, the Major is going to be around in case anybody wants to approach him, as well as these two fine gentlemen over here. I'll leave you with a thanks. Again, thank you to the team, the Secretariat, to MIRAD, to the interpreters back there behind the smoky glass, to the people involved with the webcast and the people in the room. Thank you all very much. We'll see each other tomorrow. The surveys, may I remind you to please fill them out for us today. There won't be a survey tomorrow because you won't be grading yourselves. You're supposed to grade us and the organization. So I'd be very grateful if you could fill out those surveys. Again, we'll see each other sometime before 9, perhaps 8:30 tomorrow morning, in order that we can start with the presentation. I have to tell you, I'm really looking forward to this. Most of you have met the challenge, and we're looking forward to your presentation tomorrow. Again, thank you.